Her card declined. Once, twice, 3 times. The line behind her grew restless, whispers cutting through the fluorescent-lit grocery store like knives. Claire Monroe, CEO of one of Portland's most powerful development firms, stood frozen in humiliation, her carefully constructed world cracking open in front of strangers who saw only a woman who couldn't pay for groceries. Then a quiet voice broke through the shame. "Let me get this." She turned to find a man in worn jeans, a little girl clutching his hand, eyes that held no judgment, only kindness she hadn't earned. What followed would shatter everything she thought she knew about worth, love, and what it means to build a life that matters. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or wondered if one small act of kindness could change everything, stay with me until the end. Comment below with the city you're watching from and hit that like button so I can see how far this story travels. The rain fell in steady sheets against the wide windows of Morrison's Market, blurring the Portland skyline into abstract streaks of gray and amber. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, casting everything in that particular shade of tired that only grocery stores at 6 p.m. on a Thursday could achieve. The checkout line stretched long, filled with the usual parade of exhausted commuters clutching frozen dinners and wine bottles, their faces glazed with the 1,000-yard stare of people who'd already survived too much of the week. Claire Monroe stood in that line, her Burberry trench coat still beaded with rain, her leather briefcase tucked against her side like armor. To anyone watching, she looked like she belonged in a different building entirely, one with marble floors and panoramic views, not scuffed linoleum and flickering overhead lights. Her dark hair was pulled into a flawless twist, her makeup still crisp despite 12 hours in back-to-back meetings. Even her posture radiated control, shoulders back, chin level, the bearing of someone who'd learned early that showing weakness was the fastest way to lose ground. She placed her items on the conveyor belt with practiced efficiency. Organic salad greens, a rotisserie chicken, sparkling water, bread from the bakery section, a pint of strawberries that cost more than they should. Nothing excessive, nothing that screamed desperation or chaos. Just the careful selections of a woman who'd long ago mastered the art of appearing put together. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marcus, scanned each item with mechanical precision. The total appeared on the screen, $47.83. Claire reached into her purse, Italian leather, a gift to herself after closing the Riverside Plaza deal, and pulled out her primary credit card. The black metal caught the light as she slid it into the reader. The machine beeped, once, twice, then displayed 2 words that might as well have been written in neon. Declined. Claire's stomach dropped. She stared at the screen, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. That couldn't be right. This was her primary card, the one linked to her personal account, the one that had never, not once in 8 years, been declined. You want to try again?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral in the way that service workers learn when they're trying not to embarrass customers. "Yes, of course. It must be a mistake." Her voice came out too bright, too tight. She pulled the card out and reinserted it, her fingers steady despite the heat beginning to crawl up her neck. The machine thought about it, beeped again, declined. Behind her, someone sighed. The sound was small, barely audible, but it landed like a gunshot in Claire's chest. She could feel the line pressing against her back, a physical weight of impatience and judgment. Her hands moved faster now, searching through her wallet for her backup card, the platinum one, the one she barely used but kept for emergencies. She tried it. The machine beeped its refusal almost immediately. "Do you have another form of payment?" Marcus asked, and despite his attempt at gentleness, the words felt like an indictment. Yes, just give me a moment." Claire's voice cracked on the last word. She could feel her composure fracturing, pieces of it falling away like plaster from a crumbling wall. Her fingers trembled as she dug through her purse, searching for cash she knew wasn't there. She'd stopped carrying cash months ago. Why would she need it when she had 6 different credit cards and a bank account that, as of last week, had held enough to buy a small house? Unless Richard had finally done it. Unless her ex-husband had made good on his lawyer's threats to freeze her accounts during the asset division. Unless the divorce that was supposed to be finalized next month had just become a weapon aimed directly at her dignity. "Ma'am, if you can't pay, I'm going to need to void the transaction," Marcus said, and this time there was no hiding the awkwardness in his voice. The whispers behind her grew louder. Claire caught fragments. "Holding up the whole line. Probably one of those people who live beyond their means. Designer coat, but can't afford groceries." Shame flooded through her, hot and acidic. This was Claire Monroe, CEO of Monroe Development Group, the woman who'd turned a failing commercial real estate firm into a powerhouse that had reshaped Portland's skyline. She'd given speeches at industry conferences. She'd been profiled in Portland Business Journal. She'd shaken hands with the mayor at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and now she couldn't buy a rotisserie chicken. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't understand what's happening. These cards should... They've never... Hey, Marcus." The voice came from behind her, quiet but clear. "Let me get this." Claire spun around, her heart hammering. The man standing there looked nothing like the polished executive she usually encountered. He was maybe late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered in the way that suggested physical work rather than gym memberships. His jeans were faded, his jacket a practical canvas thing with worn cuffs. Dark hair, slightly too long, curled against his collar. But it was his eyes that stopped her, warm brown, direct without being aggressive, and holding an expression she couldn't immediately name. Beside him stood a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, with tangled blonde hair and enormous blue eyes. She clutched a stuffed elephant that had clearly seen better days, its gray fabric faded to almost white in places. The child was staring up at Claire with the unfiltered curiosity that only young children possess, taking in every detail without judgment or pretense. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly," Claire stammered, her face burning. This was somehow worse than the declined cards. Charity from a stranger, from someone who clearly had less than she did, who should be saving his money for his own groceries, his own daughter. "It's okay," the man said, already moving past her to the card reader. His movements were unhurried, calm, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Everyone has days like this. Technology fails. Banks make mistakes." He slid his own card, a simple blue debit card, nothing fancy, into the machine. "Really, I can't accept. My cards must be malfunctioning. I just need to call my bank." "Already done," he said as the machine approved his payment with a cheerful beep. He nodded to Marcus, who'd been watching the exchange with barely concealed relief. "We're good. Marcus quickly bagged Claire's groceries, his movements faster now, eager to move past the awkwardness. Claire stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The man was already gathering the bags, handing them to her with the same calm efficiency he'd shown in paying. "Wait," she managed, finding her voice. "Please, I need to pay you back. I can Venmo you, or—" "No need." His smile was small, genuine, reaching those warm eyes. "Just pay it forward sometime. When you see someone who needs help, help them. That's payment enough." "But I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said. Then he gestured to the little girl. "And this is Lily. Say hi, sweetheart." "Hi," Lily whispered, suddenly shy. She pressed closer to her father's leg, though her eyes never left Claire. "I'm Claire," she said automatically, though it felt absurd to be introducing herself in a grocery checkout line to a man who just rescued her from complete humiliation. "I really don't know how to thank you." "You just did." Ethan shifted the bags in his arms. His own groceries, she realized. Just a few items. "Come on, Lilypad. We've got to get home before the rain gets worse." "Daddy, your jacket's getting wet," Lily observed, tugging at his sleeve. "It'll dry. It always does." He looked back at Claire one more time, that same quiet smile. "Take care, Claire, and don't be too hard on yourself. We all have rough days." Then they were moving toward the door, Ethan's hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder, Lily's elephant dragging slightly on the floor. Claire watched them go, her arms full of grocery bags she hadn't paid for, her heart doing something strange and uncomfortable in her chest. The bell above the door chimed as they pushed out into the rain. Through the window, she could see Ethan shrug out of his jacket and hold it over Lily's head as they hurried toward an older sedan in the parking lot. The jacket was getting soaked, she realized. He was getting soaked, but his daughter stayed dry beneath that makeshift shelter. "That's Ethan for you," Marcus said, startling her. He was smiling now, the tension from earlier completely gone. "He does that kind of thing. Helped my mom when her card got declined last month. Paid for some kid's birthday cake when the dad's check bounced. That's how he is." "He works here?" Claire asked, something clicking in her mind. "Sometimes, fills in on weekends, helps with inventory. Real jobs over at Parkside Market on Division. Been there a few years now." Marcus started scanning the next customer's items. "Good guy. Really good guy." Claire nodded mechanically and walked toward the door in a daze. The rain hit her the moment she stepped outside, cold and sharp, but she barely noticed. She stood there on the sidewalk, watching the taillights of Ethan's sedan disappear into the gray evening, her expensive coat getting soaked, her carefully styled hair beginning to frizz. "Pay it forward." The words circled in her mind as she finally moved toward her own car, a sleek BMW parked in the covered section, because of course she'd taken the good spot while Ethan had parked in the rain. She set the groceries in the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, just staring at the rain streaming down the windshield. When was the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had seen her struggling and just stepped in? In her world, every favor came with strings attached. Every kindness was currency to be traded later. Every gesture of support was really just an investment in future leverage. But Ethan hadn't wanted anything, hadn't even wanted his money back. Just pay it forward. Help someone else when they needed it. Claire pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened her banking app. The moment it loaded, she understood. Large portions of her accounts had been frozen that afternoon, pending the final divorce settlement. Richard's lawyers had moved faster than hers had anticipated. She had access to maybe $2,000 until the legal team could unfreeze everything, probably by Monday, if she called in enough favors. $2,000. She was worth millions on paper, but right now she had less accessible cash than a minimum wage worker. The irony wasn't lost on her, neither was the humiliation. But beneath both of those feelings, something else stirred. Something warm and uncomfortable and entirely unfamiliar. Gratitude. Pure, uncomplicated gratitude for a stranger who'd seen her falling and caught her without asking questions or making judgments. She drove home in a daze, the groceries sitting beside her like evidence of her own vulnerability. Her condo was in the Pearl District, 19th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was beautiful, sleek, expensive, and utterly empty. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches, just expensive furniture in shades of gray and white, everything chosen by the interior designer Richard had hired 3 years ago when they'd first bought the place. Claire set the groceries on the marble kitchen island and poured herself a glass of wine. Her hands were finally steady again, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept seeing Ethan's face, the quiet certainty in his eyes, the way he'd moved with such calm purpose. And Lily, pressed against his leg, trusting him completely. When was the last time someone trusted me like that, she wondered. When was the last time I deserved it? Her phone buzzed. 3 emails from the office. A text from her assistant about tomorrow's board meeting. A reminder about the site visit to the Hearthlight project on Saturday. Her life, continuing at its relentless pace, demanding her attention, her decisions, her leadership. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Claire didn't immediately respond. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights blurred by rain, thinking about a man in a worn jacket who'd given without expecting anything back, and a little girl with a faded elephant who'd looked at her like she was just another person, not a title or a tax bracket. Pay it forward. The words wouldn't leave her alone. They echoed in the expensive silence of her condo, in the space between her reflection and the glass, in the hollow place where her marriage used to be. Maybe, Claire thought, that was exactly what she needed to do. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, Portland settling into that particular autumn rhythm where the sun seemed more like a rumor than a reality. Claire woke earlier than usual, her mind already racing despite the early hour. She'd barely slept, thoughts circling endlessly around frozen bank accounts, the upcoming board meeting, and stubbornly, persistently, a stranger named Ethan who'd appeared and vanished like something out of a story she'd stopped believing in years ago. She went through her morning routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, the elaborate makeup ritual that transformed her from tired to polished. Black suit today, perfectly tailored, with a silk blouse the color of champagne. Armor for the boardroom, where she'd need to defend the Hearthlight project from men who measured everything in quarterly returns and never thought about the families who'd actually live in the buildings they approved. The Hearthlight project, her baby, her vision, the thing that had kept her going through the worst of the divorce. 20 acres on the east side, currently a wasteland of cracked pavement and forgotten lots. She wanted to build something different there. Not just housing, but community. Affordable units mixed with market rate, yes, but also green spaces, community gardens, a center where kids could get tutoring and parents could take ESL classes. Architecture that served people, not just profit margins. But the board was getting nervous. Costs were climbing, timelines stretching, and men like Walter Reed, who'd been on the board since before Claire was born, were making increasingly loud noises about fiscal responsibility and shareholder value and all the other phrases that really just meant, why should we care about poor people when we could make more money doing something else? Claire's phone buzzed as she was finishing her coffee. Her assistant, Jessica, always up before dawn. Jessica. Bank situation resolved. Legal team got emergency hearing. Accounts unfrozen as of 6 a.m. Richard's lawyers sanctioned for improper filing. Claire exhaled slowly, relief washing through her. At least that crisis was handled. She typed back a quick thank you and made a mental note to send Jessica something nice. Maybe those concert tickets she'd mentioned wanting. But even as relief settled in, something else nagged at her. The cards would work now. The humiliation was over. She could go back to Morrison's Market, find Marcus, ask about Ethan, track him down and pay him back properly. Except she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd said, just pay it forward. The quiet certainty that he didn't want repayment, that taking his money back would somehow cheapen what he'd done, turn it from a gift into a transaction, help someone else when they need it. Claire stared at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Designer suit, perfect makeup, hair that had cost $200 to cut and style. She looked like success, like power, like someone who had everything figured out. She looked nothing like the truth. The drive to the office took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Monroe Development Group occupied 4 floors of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building Claire had once dreamed of designing before she'd realized she was better at the business side than the architecture. Her name on the door, her vision driving the projects, her reputation on the line with every decision. The Monday morning executive meeting started at 8:30 sharp. Claire walked in to find her senior team already assembled. Marcus Chen, CFO, with his ever-present tablet and worried expression. Patricia Okoye, head of construction, built like she could personally pour concrete if needed. David Liu, lead architect, sketching something even as the meeting started. And Amanda Ross, VP of Community Relations, who actually gave a damn about the people their buildings were supposed to serve. Morning, Claire said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. What's on fire today? Hearthlight, Marcus said immediately, not even trying to soften it. The board wants a full cost analysis before Saturday's site visit. Walter's been making calls, rallying votes. He's going to push for major cuts. What kind of cuts? Claire asked, though she already knew. She could see it in Marcus's carefully neutral expression. Patricia jumped in. Community center, gardens, the affordable units. He wants to flip it to a standard mixed-use development. More commercial space, fewer residential units, higher price point. So basically gut everything that makes it worth doing. Claire's voice was flat. Basically, Amanda confirmed. He's been talking to Peterson and Jameson. They're worried about the timeline. If we can't break ground by spring, they want to pivot to something more conventional. David looked up from his sketching. The community elements are what make the design work. Remove those and we're just building another soulless box. We might as well sell the land and let someone else do it. That's probably what Walter wants, Patricia muttered. Claire stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below. Somewhere out there, families were struggling to find housing they could afford. Kids were growing up without safe places to play. Parents were working 2 jobs and still couldn't make rent. The Hearthlight project was supposed to be different. It was supposed to matter. Schedule a site visit for me, she said abruptly, before Saturday. I want to walk the property, see it again with fresh eyes, and get me everything we have on Parkside Market. Her team exchanged glances. The grocery store? Marcus asked carefully. Yes. They've been in the neighborhood for what, 15 years? They're exactly the kind of business we want as community partners. I want to understand how they've survived when so many others haven't. It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the whole truth. I can set something up, Amanda offered. They're actually one of our potential community partners already. Good reputation, deep neighborhood roots. Perfect. Make it happen. Claire turned back to her team. And Marcus? Tell Walter I'll have his cost analysis ready for Saturday, with alternatives that preserve the community elements. Claire, I'm not sure the numbers. Find a way to make the numbers work. That's what we do, isn't it? Find solutions, not excuses. The meeting continued, but Claire's mind was already elsewhere. By the time her team filed out, she'd made a decision that probably qualified as either brilliant or completely unhinged. She was going to find Ethan. Not to pay him back, that would miss the point entirely, but to understand how someone who clearly had less than she did could move through the world with such easy generosity. How a grocery store employee could make her feel more seen in 5 minutes than her ex-husband had in 5 years. And maybe, just maybe, to figure out what pay it forward actually looked like when you were used to negotiating, not giving. What? Parkside Market sat on a corner of Division Street, a neighborhood institution that had somehow survived the waves of gentrification that had transformed the surrounding blocks. The building was old but well-maintained, its brick facade painted a cheerful green, windows full of hand-drawn signs advertising sales and community events. Nothing like the sleek corporate grocery chains that dominated other parts of the city. Claire pulled into the small parking lot on Tuesday evening, feeling oddly nervous. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a simple sweater, still obviously expensive if you knew where to look, but at least not screaming, "I make more in a month than you make in a year." The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing a burst of warm air that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. Inside, the store was busy with after-work shoppers, people grabbing ingredients for dinner, parents with kids in tow. The atmosphere was completely different from Morrison's sterile efficiency. There was music playing, employees chatting with customers, a bulletin board by the entrance covered in community announcements and business cards. Claire grabbed a basket. She should at least buy something, and started wandering the aisles trying to look casual while scanning for Ethan. She felt ridiculous, like a teenager with a crush, except this wasn't about attraction. This was about what? Understanding? Connection? The uncomfortable realization that she'd built her entire life around professional success and had somehow forgotten to build an actual life? She was comparing prices on pasta sauce. When had pasta sauce gotten so expensive? When she heard a familiar voice from the next aisle over. "Mrs. Chen, you know you can call me anytime if the delivery's too heavy. I can bring it up to your apartment. It's no trouble." Claire froze, her heart doing that strange, uncomfortable thing again. She moved quietly to the end of the aisle and peered around the corner. Ethan stood with an elderly Asian woman who barely came up to his shoulder. He was wearing the store's green apron over jeans and a flannel shirt, his name tag pinned neatly over his heart. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a smudge of something, flour, on his jaw. He looked tired but attentive, genuinely focused on what the woman was saying. "My grandson usually helps," Mrs. Chen was explaining in accented English. "But he's at college now. I manage but the rice bags." "I'll bring your next order up personally," Ethan promised. "Thursday afternoon work for you? I'm off at 3. "You're too kind. Your wife must be very lucky." Something flickered across Ethan's face, there and gone so fast Claire almost missed it. "No wife, Mrs. Chen, just me and Lily, but we manage just fine." "Ah, widower?" The older woman's voice softened. "I'm sorry. I know how hard it is." "Thank you. It's been 3 years now. We're okay." He squeezed Mrs. Chen's shoulder gently. "Let me know if you need anything else." Claire stepped back quickly as they parted ways, her mind racing. Widower, single father, working at a grocery store despite what had Marcus at Morrison said, filling in on weekends, helping with inventory. This was his real job, not a side gig. She waited until Mrs. Chen had moved on, then took a breath and stepped around the corner as if she'd just happened to arrive. Ethan? He looked up, surprise flashing across his face, followed by recognition and something that might have been pleasure. Claire, I didn't expect to... Are you following me? The words were teasing, light, but his eyes were sharp. No, I mean... Claire felt her face heat. I live in the neighborhood, sort of. Close enough. I wanted to... I owe you money. No, you don't. He said it firmly but kindly, the way you'd correct a child who'd gotten something wrong. I told you, pay it forward. That's all. My cards work now. It was just a banking issue. I can pay you back properly. And I can properly decline. He started straightening boxes of pasta on the shelf they were standing beside, his movements efficient and practiced. How are you doing? Everything sorted out? Yes, Claire hesitated. How much should she tell him? That her ex-husband had frozen her accounts out of spite? That she was a CEO who'd been temporarily too broke to buy groceries? It was a complicated situation. But yes, it's resolved. Good. I'm glad. He moved to the next section, and Claire found herself following, her basket still empty except for the pasta sauce she'd been using as a prop. Can I at least buy you coffee or something, as a thank you? Ethan paused, considering her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. I get off at 8. There's a place 2 blocks down that stays open late. Mama Lou's, you know it? I'll find it. Bring Lily, he added. Fair warning, though, she'll talk your ear off about her art class if you let her. Claire smiled, surprised by how much she wanted to meet the little girl again. I'll take that risk. Mama Lou's turned out to be a tiny Vietnamese restaurant squeezed between a laundromat and a vintage clothing store. The kind of place Claire would have driven past 1,000 times without noticing, but that clearly held deep neighborhood importance based on how many people called out greetings when Ethan walked in with Lily's hand in his. They found a booth in the back, worn vinyl seats patched with duct tape in places. Lily immediately claimed the spot next to Claire, setting her stuffed elephant on the table between them. This is Mr. Trunk, she announced solemnly. He's been everywhere with me since... She paused, glancing at her father. Since your mom gave him to you, Ethan finished gently. It's okay to talk about her, Lily Pad. Since my mom gave him to me, Lily repeated, her small hand resting on the elephant's head. She said elephants never forget, so Mr. Trunk would help me remember her. Claire's throat tightened. That's beautiful, she managed. Do you have kids? Lily asked with the directness of children. No. The word felt heavier than it should. She and Richard had talked about it early on, but there had always been another deal to close, another project to launch. And then it had been too late, the marriage too hollow to bring a child into. Oh. Lily seemed to accept this as just another fact about the world. Daddy says some people have kids, and some people have other important things. He says both are okay. Your daddy sounds very wise. He is, Lily agreed seriously. He knows about buildings and stars and how to make really good pancakes. Ethan laughed, a sound that transformed his whole face. High praise. Though I should clarify that my pancakes are merely adequate. They're the best, Lily insisted. She turned to Claire. Do you like pancakes? I do, though I'm terrible at making them. Daddy could teach you. He teaches lots of people things. A waitress appeared, Mama Lou herself, based on how she greeted Ethan and Lily like family. They ordered without looking at menus. Pho for Ethan, spring rolls and rice for Lily, and on Ethan's recommendation, bun cha for Claire. As they waited for food, Claire found herself studying the dynamic between father and daughter. The easy affection, the way Lily unconsciously leaned against Ethan's arm while she colored on her paper placemat, the way he absently smoothed her hair when she got frustrated with her drawing. There was grief there. She could see it in the careful way they talked about Lily's mother, in the slight shadow that crossed Ethan's face when the subject came up. But there was also something whole and healthy, a relationship built on honest love rather than obligation or expectation. So, Ethan said once Lily was absorbed in her coloring, you said you live in the neighborhood. Pearl District, Claire admitted. So, adjacent to the neighborhood. His mouth quirked. The fancy part. Yes, it's fancy. She felt oddly embarrassed about it. I bought it with my ex-husband a few years ago. I keep meaning to move somewhere with more character. But you haven't. But I haven't. Claire traced the pattern on her water glass. Inertia, I guess. It's easier to stay than to figure out where I'd rather be. I know that feeling. Ethan shifted so Lily could reach the crayon box more easily. After Sarah died, my wife, I stayed in our apartment for almost a year. Every corner had memories. It hurt to be there, but it hurt worse to think about leaving her behind. What changed? Lily. He glanced at his daughter, who was now drawing what appeared to be a purple cat. She asked me one day if we could find a place that felt like ours, not just like the place where Mommy used to be. Kids are wiser than we give them credit for. The food arrived, and conversation paused while they ate. Claire was surprised by how good everything was, how the complex flavors seemed to wake up taste buds she'd forgotten she had. She'd been eating expensive restaurant meals for years, but this felt different, more real somehow. "Daddy," Lily said around a mouthful of rice, "can Claire come to the garden day on Saturday?" Lily, manners, and we don't know if Claire has other plans. Garden day? Claire asked, genuinely curious. The Hearthlight Project, Ethan explained, and Claire's heart skipped. There's a community garden that some volunteers started on part of the property. First Saturday of every month, people come to help maintain it, plant new things. It's become a neighborhood thing. He smiled slightly. I designed it, actually, or the bones of it, anyway. The community filled in the details. Claire's mind raced. He'd designed it? Part of her project? I'd love to come, she said, meaning it completely. Really? Lily's face lit up. We could show you all the plants. And the fountain Daddy helped build, and there's going to be new flowers that Mr. Rodriguez is bringing from his nursery. Sounds perfect, Claire said, her eyes on Ethan. What time? 9 to noon, usually, though some folks stay later. Bring gloves if you have them, and expect to get dirty. He paused. You sure? It's not exactly a Pearl District kind of activity. Maybe that's exactly what I need, Claire said quietly. Something passed between them then, unspoken but understood. Two people circling around the edges of something neither quite knew how to name yet. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. After dinner, they walked out together into the cool night. Lily held both their hands, swinging between them like a bridge, chattering about her art class and the painting she was working on. Claire realized with a start that she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this light, this present, this much like a person instead of a position. This is us, Ethan said, stopping by his sedan. Lily immediately started climbing into her car seat, still talking. Thank you, Claire said. For dinner. For everything. You paid for dinner, Ethan pointed out, despite my objections. Consider it paying forward. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. See you Saturday then, 9 a.m., corner of Belmont and 52nd. I'll be there. Claire watched them drive away, Lily's hand waving frantically through the back window, Mr. Trunk pressed against the glass. She stood there in the parking lot of a Vietnamese restaurant she'd never known existed, in jeans that cost more than most people's rent, feeling something shift in her chest like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. She'd come here to understand how to pay forward kindness. But maybe what she was really learning was how to be human again, how to want something more than success, how to stand in a parking lot and feel happy about plans to garden with a widowed grocery store employee and his daughter, how to start building a life instead of just a career. The Hearthlight Project site visit was 3 days away. The board meeting was 4. Her whole professional world was balanced on a knife's edge, and somehow all she could think about was Saturday morning and the way Ethan's eyes had warmed when she'd said yes to the garden day. Claire drove home slowly, taking streets she didn't usually use, seeing the city in a way she hadn't in years. Not as a collection of properties and development opportunities, but as a place where people actually lived, where children grew up and families put down roots and communities formed around Vietnamese restaurants and monthly garden days, where maybe, just maybe, she could learn to belong too. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in mist, the kind of soft gray dawn that made Portland feel like it existed somewhere between dream and reality. Claire woke before her alarm, nerves and anticipation tangled together in her stomach. She stood in her walk-in closet for an embarrassingly long time, staring at rows of designer suits and silk blouses, before finally pulling on old jeans she'd forgotten she owned and a faded university sweatshirt that had somehow survived a decade of closet purges. In the mirror, she looked younger, softer, more like the woman she'd been before ambition had filed down all her edges into something sharp and professional. The drive to the Hearthlight site took 15 minutes through empty weekend streets. As she turned onto Belmont, the property came into view. 20 acres of potential wrapped in chain-link fencing, most of it still vacant and waiting. But in the northeast corner, she could see movement, color, life. Claire parked on the street and walked toward the gathering, her new gardening gloves stiff in her hands. The community garden had transformed what used to be cracked asphalt into something verdant and alive. Raised beds marched in neat rows, some already bursting with late-season vegetables, others freshly turned and waiting for winter crops. A small greenhouse stood at the back, its plastic panels catching the morning light. And in the center, a stone fountain bubbled quietly, water trickling over smooth rocks into a shallow basin. "You came!" Lily's voice rang out, and suddenly the little girl was running toward her, Mr. Trunk tucked under one arm, her other hand outstretched. "Daddy said you might be too busy, but I knew you'd come." Claire caught Lily's hand, warmth spreading through her chest. "I promised, didn't I?" "Lots of people promise things and don't do them," Lily said matter-of-factly. "But you're not like that. I can tell." Before Claire could respond to that unsettling insight, Ethan appeared from behind the greenhouse, carrying a flat of seedlings. He'd traded his grocery store uniform for worn jeans and a gray Henley that had seen better days, dirt already smudged across one shoulder. When he saw her, his whole face shifted, surprise giving way to something warmer, more pleased than he probably meant to show. "Morning," he called. "Fair warning, we put the newcomers on weeding duty. Hope that's okay." "I'll try not to embarrass myself," Claire said, accepting the hand trowel he offered. "Oh, you will absolutely embarrass yourself," a woman's voice cut in, amused and knowing. Claire turned to find a black woman in her 60s, built solid as an oak, dirt already caked under her fingernails. "First-timers always do. I'm Dorothy Washington. I run the community center 3 blocks down, and I know soft hands when I see them." Claire looked down at her admittedly soft hands, then back up at Dorothy's knowing smile. "That obvious?" "Honey, you're wearing jeans that cost more than my mortgage payment, but that's okay. We all start somewhere." Dorothy handed her a bucket. "You're on thistle duty in bed 7. Pull from the root or they'll just come back meaner." The next 2 hours dissolved into dirt and sweat and the surprising satisfaction of yanking stubborn weeds from soil that smelled rich and alive. Claire worked beside a mix of volunteers, elderly Vietnamese women who moved with practiced efficiency, young parents with toddlers in tow, teenagers fulfilling community service hours, all of them part of this neighborhood ecosystem she'd never really seen before. Ethan moved through the garden like a conductor guiding an orchestra, answering questions, solving problems, demonstrating proper planting depth to a group of kids with infinitely more patience than Claire had ever managed with her employees. She watched him kneel beside Lily to help her transplant marigolds, his hands gentle as he showed her how to cradle the roots, his voice low and encouraging. "He's good at that," Dorothy said, appearing beside Claire with a water bottle. "Teaching, I mean. Used to teach architecture before life got complicated." Claire accepted the water, curiosity sharpening. "He mentioned he worked in architecture, but teaching?" "Adjunct professor at Portland State for 2 years before his wife got sick. Students loved him, said he could make them see buildings as living things, not just structures." Dorothy's expression softened. "He gave it all up to take care of Sarah. Then after she passed, he stayed home for Lily. Man's got his priorities straight, even if it cost him his career." The words settled over Claire like a weight. She'd known Ethan had sacrificed, but hearing the specifics made it real in a way that twisted something in her chest. How many people would choose family over professional success? How many would walk away from a career they loved without resentment? How many would do it and still move through the world with kindness instead of bitterness? You asking about him for a reason? Dorothy's eyes were sharp despite the casual tone. He helped me out of a difficult situation recently, Claire said carefully. I'm trying to understand him better. Mm-hmm. Dorothy's knowing look suggested she saw right through that half-truth. Well, you want to understand Ethan Brooks. You watch how he is with his daughter. Everything else flows from that. He rebuilt his whole life around being the father she needed. Not many men would do that. Not many people, period. Before Claire could respond, a commotion erupted near the fountain. Two boys, maybe 10 or 11, were arguing over a garden hose, voices rising as they tugged it back and forth. Water sprayed everywhere, catching other volunteers in the crossfire. Ethan was there in seconds, but instead of yelling or grabbing the hose away, he simply stepped between the boys and turned off the water at the source. Marcus, Jamal, he said quietly, what's going on? He said I was doing it wrong, the taller boy, Marcus, protested. Because you were. The tomatoes need more water than the lettuce. Everyone knows that. Okay. Ethan held up his hands. You're both right, actually. Marcus, the tomatoes do need more water. Jamal, there's a gentler way to give feedback. How about this? Marcus, you handle the tomatoes and peppers in beds 1 through 3. Jamal, you take the greens in 4 and 5. I'll check both sections in 20 minutes and we'll see who does better. Deal? The boys looked at each other, tension deflating into something more competitive than combative. Deal, they said in unison, already moving toward their assigned beds. How did you do that? Claire asked when Ethan returned to where she was working. He shrugged, grabbing his own trowel. Kids don't usually want to fight. They just don't know how to communicate what they need. Give them structure and purpose. Most problems solve themselves. He glanced at her, a smile playing at his mouth. Same principle works with architecture, actually. Good design anticipates conflict and redirects it into something productive. Is that what you did here? Claire gestured at the garden around them. Anticipated conflict? Sort of. Community gardens fail when people feel territorial or excluded. So we built in abundance, more beds than we currently need, shared spaces between individual plots, communal areas for people who don't want their own section. He pointed toward a cluster of benches near the fountain. Those sitting areas are positioned so parents can supervise kids in the play space while also being part of garden conversations. Everything's designed to encourage connection rather than division. Claire looked at the garden with new eyes, seeing the intentionality in every choice, the way paths curved to create natural gathering points, how the greenhouse was positioned to be accessible but not dominating, the fountain placed where its sound would carry but not overwhelm conversation. This is brilliant, she said softly. The whole layout, it's not just functional, it's thoughtful. Every element serves multiple purposes. Ethan's cheeks colored slightly. It's just a garden. No, it's not. It's community infrastructure disguised as a garden. It's exactly what... She caught herself, the words exactly what Hearthlight needs dying on her tongue. She still hadn't told him about her connection to the project, and every hour that passed made that omission feel more like a lie. What were you going to say? Ethan asked, watching her with those perceptive eyes. Just that it's exactly what neighborhoods like this need, Claire finished, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. Spaces that bring people together. Before he could press further, Lily appeared with a flower crown made of dandelions and clover, which she solemnly placed on Claire's head. Now you're the garden queen, she announced. Queens have to help plant the new roses Mr. Rodriguez brought. Claire let herself be led away, grateful for the interruption, but increasingly uncomfortable with her own deception. This wasn't just about paying forward kindness anymore. She was learning from Ethan, absorbing his philosophy and approach, planning to apply it to a project he didn't even know she controlled. When had helpfulness crossed over into exploitation? The planting lesson turned into an impromptu class with Mr. Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 70s with soil permanently embedded in the creases of his hands, explaining proper rose care with the passion of someone describing a religious experience. Claire found herself genuinely fascinated, taking mental notes about root depth and pH balance, concepts she'd approved in architectural plans without ever really understanding their practical application. You're good at this, Ethan murmured, working beside her to dig a hole for one of the bushes. Listening, I mean. Really listening. Most people hear instructions but don't absorb them. Force of habit, Claire admitted. My job requires a lot of listening. What do you do? The question was casual, curious, not probing. This was it, the moment to tell him the truth. To explain that she was Claire Monroe, CEO of the company that owned this land, that she'd come here with ulterior motives, even if those motives had shifted into something more complicated. But Lily was right there, chattering about the pink roses versus the yellow ones, and Mr. Rodriguez was watching to make sure they planted at the correct depth. And the moment passed like water through her fingers. I work in development, Claire said, which was true if incomplete. Commercial real estate, mostly. Ah. Something flickered in Ethan's expression, there and gone too fast to read. That must be, interesting. It can be, when it's done right. She patted soil around the rosebush, trying to match the care she'd seen Mr. Rodriguez demonstrate. When it's done wrong, it's just gentrification with better marketing. Sounds like you've seen both sides. I'm trying to. Claire sat back on her heels, looking at the garden stretched around them, at the volunteers working together, at Lily showing another little girl how to water without drowning the roots. I'm trying to remember why I got into this work in the first place, before it became about profit margins and quarterly returns. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling in the dirt. I know that feeling, he said finally. When I was in architecture, I started out wanting to design spaces that improved lives. By the end, I was so caught up in deadlines and client demands that I'd forgotten what any of it was for. He looked at her directly, and she felt the weight of his attention like sunlight. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what matters. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she wasn't sure she fully understood yet. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but Dorothy's voice called out across the garden. Lunch break, everyone! Potluck under the tent! The volunteers began migrating toward a canopy that had been set up near the greenhouse, tables beneath it groaning under the weight of food people had brought. Claire realized with a start that this was part of the monthly ritual too, the shared meal, the breaking of bread together. She'd brought nothing. The thought hadn't even occurred to her. Don't worry, Ethan said, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. There's always more than enough. Dorothy makes sure of it. The meal was chaotic and wonderful, a collision of cultures and cooking styles that somehow worked. Vietnamese spring rolls next to Mexican tamales, soul food mac and cheese beside Ethiopian injera, everything offered freely and consumed with equal enthusiasm. Claire found herself wedged between Lily and a teenage girl named Aisha, who was telling an elaborate story about her chemistry teacher's unfortunate encounter with a Bunsen burner. This, Claire thought, accepting a plate that had been filled by at least 3 different people, was what community looked like. Not the sanitized version she'd pitched in boardrooms, but the messy, loud, generous reality of people who'd chosen to care about each other. Miss Claire, Lily said, tugging her sleeve, are you going to come back next month? Claire looked at Ethan, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'd like to, if that's okay. It's a public garden, he said, but his smile took any sting out of the words. Anyone who shows up and works is welcome. Then yes, Claire told Lily. I'll be back. The little girl beamed and immediately launched into planning which vegetables they should plant together next time. Her enthusiasm infectious enough that Claire found herself genuinely looking forward to it. When was the last time she'd committed to something with no professional benefit? When had she last done something simply because it felt good? As the afternoon wore on and volunteers began packing up, Claire helped fold tables and stack chairs, her muscles pleasantly sore in ways her gym workouts never achieved. She was loading folding chairs into Dorothy's truck when her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. Jessica's name flashed on the screen. Claire hesitated, then stepped away from the group to answer. Jessica, everything okay? Define okay? Her assistant's voice was tight. Walter Reed just called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. He's pushing for a vote on Hearthlight restructuring. Claire, I think he's trying to force it through before you can mount a proper defense. Claire's stomach dropped. Monday? That's barely 48 hours from now. I know, I'm sorry. I told him you needed more time, but he pulled rank, said this has been dragging on long enough and the board deserves to make a decision. Bastard. Claire pressed her hand to her forehead, mind already racing. Okay, I need cost projections, community impact statements, alternative funding models. Can you get Marcus and Patricia on a call tonight? Already scheduled for 7. Claire, what do you need from me? Everything you can find on successful community integrated developments. Case studies, financial outcomes, tenant satisfaction data. I need proof that this model works, not just philosophically, but financially. On it. Claire? Jessica's voice softened. You've got this. Hearthlight is good. The board just needs to remember that. Claire ended the call and stood there for a moment, the phone heavy in her hand. Around her, the garden hummed with end-of-day activity, people saying goodbye, making plans for next month, loading leftover food into cars. This was what she was fighting for. Not some abstract concept, but this. Actual people building actual community on land that could so easily be turned into just another profitable development that served no one but shareholders. Bad news. Ethan's voice gentle with concern. Claire turned to find him watching her, Lily half asleep against his shoulder, Mr. Trunk dangling from her relaxed grip. He looked tired but content, dirt smudged across his jaw, his hair even more disheveled than usual. He looked, she thought with startling clarity, like home was supposed to look. Work emergency, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. There's a crisis I need to handle. On a Saturday? Real estate development doesn't respect weekends. The bitterness in her tone surprised even her. Ethan shifted Lily's weight carefully. Anything I can help with? The offer was so genuine, so completely without expectation of anything in return, that Claire felt something crack open in her chest. Here was this man who'd already given her so much, kindness, perspective, a glimpse of what life could look like beyond ambition, offering more without even knowing what she needed. Actually, she heard herself say, maybe there is. Could we talk sometime? Not about the garden, but about design philosophy, community integration, what makes spaces work for real people instead of just on paper. Ethan studied her for a long moment. This is for your job? Yes, but it's also... Claire struggled for words that weren't lies or omissions. I'm working on a project that could either help a lot of people or hurt them, depending on how it's done. And I think you understand something about human-centered design that I've lost somewhere along the way. Monday's tough, Ethan said slowly, but I'm off Sunday afternoon. Lily has art class from 2 to 4. If you don't mind meeting at a coffee shop while I wait for her, that would be perfect. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might not tell you what you want to hear. Good, Claire said, meaning it. I don't want easy answers. I want real ones. As she drove home through the lengthening shadows, Claire's mind spun between two competing crises. Monday's board meeting loomed like a storm on the horizon, Walter Reed and his faction ready to gut everything Hearthlight was meant to be. But tomorrow, Sunday, she'd sit across from Ethan and try to find language for what she'd seen today. The garden as living proof that her vision could work. That community-centered development wasn't just idealistic fantasy, but achievable reality. She just had to figure out how to use what she learned without betraying the man teaching her. Sunday morning arrived too bright and too early. Claire spent it on conference calls and reviewing spreadsheets, Marcus walking her through revised budget projections while Patricia explained timeline alternatives. By noon, she had enough data to make a compelling presentation, but the numbers felt hollow without the heart behind them. Without the why that would make the board see these weren't just units and square footage, but homes and community. At 1:30, she found herself back in jeans and a sweater, her work laptop abandoned on the marble counter as she headed across town to the small coffee shop Ethan had suggested. It was called Grounded, a name that felt appropriate in ways Claire suspected were unintentional. Ethan was already there, sitting in a worn leather chair by the window, a portfolio case resting against the table leg. He looked different in the afternoon light, more serious somehow, the grief he carried more visible without Lily's brightness to soften the edges. Hi, Claire said, suddenly nervous. Thanks for meeting me. Of course. He gestured to the chair across from him. I got you a latte. Hope that's okay. You seemed like a latte person. Claire accepted the cup, touched by the small thoughtfulness. Latte person? Someone who appreciates complexity but wants it to taste approachable. His smile was slight. Architecture teaches you to read people through their preferences. And what do your preferences say about you? He lifted his own cup, plain black coffee. That I've learned to appreciate the essential without needing embellishment. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks, watching pedestrians pass outside the window. Claire noticed how Ethan's eyes tracked a mother struggling with a stroller over the curb, how his body tensed as if to help even though he was too far away to do anything, always watching, always ready to step in where he was needed. So, he said finally, human-centered design. What specifically do you want to know? Claire set down her cup, choosing her words carefully. I'm working on a mixed-use development project, residential and commercial, integrated community spaces, affordable housing components. On paper, it's everything I've always wanted to build, but the people controlling the purse strings want to cut the community elements because they're expensive and don't generate immediate returns. And you want ammunition to fight them. I want to understand if I'm right to fight them, Claire corrected. Because maybe they have a point. Maybe I'm being naive, thinking you can build profitable developments that actually serve the people who live in them. Ethan leaned back, considering her. Can I ask you something first? Of course. Why does this project matter to you? Specifically, this one, enough that you're spending your weekend trying to save it. The question landed harder than she'd expected. Claire stared into her coffee, watching the foam dissolve into caramel-colored liquid. Because I'm tired of building monuments to wealth, she said finally. I got into this field because I thought architecture could change lives. That the spaces we create shape how people interact, how communities form, whether families thrive or just survive. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I started measuring success in profit margins and square footage instead of in lives actually improved. She looked up, meeting his eyes. This project is my chance to remember, to build something that matters, not just something that makes money. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he reached for the portfolio case and pulled out a leather folder, worn smooth at the corners. Can I show you something? He opened the folder to reveal architectural drawings, hand-sketched in careful detail, notes in the margins in neat print. Claire recognized the style immediately, preliminary design work, the kind architects did when they were still dreaming rather than drafting. This was my thesis project at Portland State, Ethan explained, turning pages slowly. A community center for a neighborhood not unlike the one where Hearthlight is going. Mixed-income housing integrated with shared spaces, community kitchen, study areas, childcare facilities, garden plots. The whole thing designed around the idea that architecture should facilitate connection, not isolate people into separate economic tiers. Claire leaned forward, studying the drawings with growing fascination. The design was elegant but unpretentious, every element serving multiple purposes, spaces flowing together in ways that felt organic rather than forced. It was exactly what she'd been trying to articulate for Hearthlight, but hadn't quite managed. This is incredible, she breathed. Did you build it? No. Something sad crossed his face. The project was theoretical, and then life happened. Sarah got sick, priorities changed. By the time I might have had the bandwidth to pursue it, the firm I worked for had moved on to more conventional projects. He touched one of the drawings gently, almost reverently. But I still think about it, what it could have been. It could still be something, Claire said impulsively. Design like this doesn't expire. The need for it just gets more urgent. Maybe. Ethan turned another page, revealing community garden layouts that looked remarkably similar to what they'd worked on yesterday. But good design without proper execution is just expensive fantasy. You need people who understand not just how to build structures, but how to build community. And that takes time, investment, genuine commitment from everyone involved. What if you had all that? Claire pressed. Time, investment, commitment. What would you do differently than conventional development? For the next hour, Ethan walked her through his philosophy, sketching modifications to his old designs as he talked. He explained how community kitchens could reduce individual living costs while creating natural gathering spaces. How integrated childcare facilities could serve double duty as educational centers and give working parents actual support. How rooftop gardens weren't just aesthetic choices, but food sources and climate control in places where elderly residents could supervise children playing below. Every suggestion was grounded in real human needs, backed by spatial reasoning that made Claire's developer brain light up with possibilities. This wasn't idealistic fantasy. This was practical, achievable innovation that could actually pencil out financially if implemented correctly. "You're thinking about money," Ethan observed, watching her face. "I'm thinking your ideas could save my project," Claire admitted. "If I can show the board that community elements actually reduce long-term costs while increasing tenant satisfaction and retention, they might listen." "Maybe." "Who's on your board?" "Mostly men who've been in commercial real estate since before I was born. They think in quarterly returns and don't trust anything that doesn't have 50 years of precedent." Ethan winced. Tough crowd. The toughest. Claire looked at the drawing spread between them, at the care and vision in every line. Could I possibly borrow these? Just a scan and return, I promise. They could make the difference between saving this project and watching it become another soulless money generator." He hesitated, his hand protective over the portfolio. These were clearly precious to him, artifacts from a life he'd left behind. She was asking for trust she hadn't earned, for help with a project she still hadn't fully explained. "Claire," he said slowly, "what exactly is this project you're working on?" This was it. The moment where she either came clean or compounded the lie through further omission. Claire opened her mouth, the truth right there on her tongue, when her phone buzzed with violent insistence. Jessica's name. She almost ignored it, but years of conditioning won out. "So sorry, I have to—" She answered. "Jessica?" "Claire, thank God. Walter just moved the meeting up to tomorrow at 8 a.m. He's claiming scheduling conflicts, but I think he's trying to catch you unprepared. And he's distributed preliminary budget recommendations to the board that completely eliminate the community center and gardens." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "He can't do that without a vote. He's framing them as suggestions pending tomorrow's approval. Claire, half the board is already indicating support. If we don't have something compelling by morning, Hearthlight is dead." "I'll be there in an hour." Claire ended the call, her hands shaking. When she looked up, Ethan was watching her with quiet concern. That sounded bad. "It's my project, the development I was telling you about. They're trying to kill it tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Claire, you can't possibly prepare a full counterproposal in that time." "I have to try." She started gathering her things, mind already racing ahead to what she needed. Revised budgets, community impact data, visual representations that would make the board actually see what they were voting to destroy. Visual representations like the drawings spread on the table between them. She stopped, looking at Ethan, at the portfolio he still held protectively. Asking felt wrong, but so did giving up without trying. "I know I have no right to ask this," she said quietly, "but could I borrow your thesis designs? Just for the presentation. I'll give them back tomorrow afternoon, I swear. They could help save something that matters." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and Claire could see him weighing trust against instinct, generosity against self-protection. Finally, slowly, he closed the portfolio and slid it across the table. "Bring them back intact," he said. "And Claire, whatever you're fighting for tomorrow, I hope it's worth it." "It is," she promised, clutching the portfolio like a lifeline. "I'll explain everything when this is over. I owe you that. I owe you a lot more than that." She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Claire?" She turned back. "Good luck," he said simply. "And if they don't listen, if they choose profit over people, walk away. Your integrity is worth more than any project." The words followed her out into the cooling afternoon, into her car, through the frantic drive back to her condo. She spread Ethan's drawings across her dining table, her laptop open beside them, and began building the presentation that would either save Hearthlight or end her career. Because somewhere between a declined credit card and a community garden, between cheap Vietnamese food and borrowed architectural dreams, Claire had remembered what she'd gotten into development to do. And she wasn't going to let Walter Reed or anyone else take that away without a fight, even if it cost her everything. The hours between Sunday evening and Monday morning dissolved into a blur of spreadsheets and sketches. coffee that went cold before she could finish it, and the growing certainty that she was about to walk into a battle she might not win. Claire worked through the night, her dining room transformed into a war room, Ethan's drawings arranged beside her own project renderings, Marcus and Patricia on speakerphone offering suggestions and revisions until their voices went hoarse. By 3 a.m., she had something. Not perfect, but compelling. A presentation that wove Ethan's community-centered design philosophy through Hearthlight's financial projections, showing how integrated spaces could actually reduce long-term operational costs while increasing tenant retention and property values. She'd found case studies from Seattle, Vancouver, even one from Copenhagen that proved mixed-income developments with robust community elements outperformed conventional projects over 10-year periods. But the numbers, however persuasive, felt incomplete without the heart, without the why that made this more than just another development strategy. Claire stared at Ethan's thesis drawings, at the careful notations in the margins explaining how each space was designed to facilitate human connection, to break down the barriers that segregated communities along economic lines. His handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its clarity, and she found herself tracing the words with her finger, trying to absorb not just the content but the care behind it. She'd promised to return these intact. She'd promised an explanation. But what she hadn't promised, what she'd actively avoided, was the truth about who she was and what this project really meant. Ethan had trusted her with something precious, and she'd taken it under false pretenses, letting him believe she was just another developer trying to do better, rather than the CEO, whose decisions would determine whether his neighborhood stayed a community or became just another profit center. The guilt sat heavy in her stomach, but there was no time to process it. At 6 a.m., she showered and dressed in her sharpest suit, charcoal gray, severe lines, the armor she wore when she needed to remind people she wasn't someone to be dismissed. She gathered her presentation materials, secured Ethan's portfolio carefully in her briefcase, and drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the glass tower that held her office, and in 90 minutes, her professional reckoning. The Monroe Development Group conference room occupied the entire northwest corner of the 20th floor, windows on two sides offering panoramic views of Portland's skyline. On clear days, you could see Mount Hood in the distance, snow-capped and eternal. Today, low clouds pressed against the glass, turning the world outside into formless gray. Claire arrived to find the board members already assembling, men and women in expensive suits carrying leather folders, and the particular confidence that came from decades of making decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever having to live with the consequences. Walter Reed stood at the head of the table, 72 years old, and still carrying himself like he owned every room he entered, which in most cases he practically did. "Claire," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "thank you for accommodating the schedule change. I know it was short notice." "Of course, Walter." Claire set her briefcase down with deliberate care, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. "Though I'm curious why the urgency. We've been developing Hearthlight for 18 months. What changed in the last 48 hours? "Fiscal responsibility," Walter replied smoothly. "The quarterly reports show we're overextended on several projects. The board feels it's time to make some strategic adjustments to ensure shareholder value." Translation: the board, or at least Walter's faction of it, wanted to cut anything that didn't promise immediate returns, and Hearthlight's community elements were first on the chopping block. The other board members settled into their seats. Patricia Chen, the only other woman on the board and one of Claire's few consistent allies. James Kowalski, who'd made his fortune in strip malls and saw all development through that lens. Linda Martinez, whose real estate empire was built on luxury condos and had little patience for affordable housing. Robert Park, Michael O'Brien, Sandra Whitmore, all variations on the same theme of pragmatic capitalism, untroubled by questions of social responsibility. "Shall we begin?" Walter said, not waiting for agreement before pulling up his presentation on the main screen. "I've prepared a revised budget proposal for the Hearthlight project that addresses our current financial concerns while maintaining the project's core profitability." What followed was a systematic dismantling of everything Claire had fought to preserve. Walter's slides showed the community center eliminated, replaced by additional commercial retail space. The gardens and green spaces reduced to minimal landscaping required by zoning. The affordable housing units cut by 60%. The remaining inventory repositioned as market rate with premium finishes. These modifications, Walter explained with the calm authority of someone who'd never doubted his own correctness, reduced development costs by 32%, while increasing projected returns by 18%. We maintain the Hearthlight brand identity while delivering the financial performance our shareholders expect. You've maintained the name, Claire said quietly, but gutted the mission. What you're describing isn't Hearthlight anymore. It's just another generic development that happens to occupy the same land. Claire, I understand you're emotionally invested in the original vision, Walter said with practiced sympathy that made her skin crawl. But emotion doesn't pay dividends. The market has shifted since we initiated this project. We need to shift with it, or risk significant losses. The market hasn't shifted that dramatically, Patricia interjected, her first contribution to the discussion. Demand for affordable housing is higher than ever. Our waiting lists for similar properties are months long. Affordable housing that operates at minimal margins, James countered. We're a development company, not a charity. We're a company that claims to build communities, Claire said, her voice sharper than she intended. That was our brand positioning when I took over as CEO. Building spaces that serve real people, not just maximizing square footage. Or have we abandoned that entirely? The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Walter's expression hardened. No one is suggesting we abandon our values, Claire. We're suggesting we balance them with fiscal reality, something you seem to have difficulty with lately. The implication hung in the air that Claire was too idealistic, too emotional, too female to make the hard decisions that business required. She'd faced variations of this dismissal her entire career. The suggestion that caring about anything beyond profit was weakness rather than strength. If we could review the actual proposal, Claire said, forcing calm into her voice, I've prepared alternative modifications that address cost concerns while preserving the community elements that make this project worthwhile. She pulled up her presentation and for the next 30 minutes walked the board through revised budgets that incorporated Ethan's design innovations. Community kitchens that reduced individual unit costs, integrated childcare facilities that could generate revenue while serving residents, rooftop gardens that provided food, recreation, and climate control. Every suggestion backed by data, by case studies, by financial projections that showed long-term value, even if short-term costs were higher. But it was when she showed Ethan's drawings, the thesis project reimagined for Hearthlight's specific site, that she felt the energy in the room shift. The designs were beautiful, elegant in their functionality, and they made the vision tangible in ways her spreadsheets never could. She watched board members lean forward, actually seeing for the first time what Hearthlight could be rather than just what it would cost. These designs, Linda said slowly, where did you source them? A local architect, Claire replied, keeping her voice neutral. Someone with extensive experience in community-integrated development. And they're available to consult on the project, Patricia asked, genuine interest in her tone. Claire hesitated. She hadn't asked Ethan that, hadn't even told him this was her project, let alone that she was using his work to defend it. That would need to be negotiated, she said carefully. Walter was studying the drawings with narrowed eyes, and Claire could see him searching for weaknesses, for arguments against what was clearly compelling work. These are theoretical designs, he said finally. Beautiful, certainly, but unproven in actual implementation. We'd be taking enormous risk betting on concepts that have never been built. The architect in question was lead designer on the Horizon Plaza project, Claire said, the words out before she could stop them. Community integration elements that are still cited as industry best practice 5 years later. That got attention. Horizon Plaza was legendary in development circles, a project that had somehow managed to be both commercially successful and genuinely beneficial to its surrounding neighborhood. If this mystery architect had been part of that team, their credibility was unquestionable. Who is this person? James asked. Why aren't they working with a major firm anymore? Personal circumstances required a career change, Claire said, protective instinct rising. But their expertise remains relevant, and given the neighborhood connection, they understand the community needs better than any outside consultant we could hire. I want a name, Walter demanded. If we're basing project modifications on someone's designs, we need to know who they are. Claire's mind raced. Giving Ethan's name would lead to questions she couldn't answer without revealing she'd been operating under false pretenses. But refusing to identify him would undermine her entire argument. She was saved by Patricia, who cleared her throat and spoke with quiet authority. I move that we table Walter's proposal pending further analysis of Claire's alternative modifications. These designs merit serious consideration, and making a hasty decision could cost us the opportunity to build something genuinely innovative. Seconded, Linda said, surprising everyone, including herself. Walter's jaw tightened. This is exactly the kind of delay that's plaguing this project. We need decisive action, not endless deliberation. We need informed action, Patricia countered. Claire, how long would you need to develop a complete implementation plan based on these designs, including contractor estimates and revised timelines? 2 weeks, Claire said, knowing she was buying time she might not be able to use productively. I can have comprehensive proposals ready for the next board meeting. That's acceptable, Patricia said. All in favor of postponing the vote? The vote split 5-4, with Patricia's motion barely passing. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. 2 weeks to turn Ethan's theoretical designs into concrete plans. 2 weeks to find contractors willing to work within revised budgets. 2 weeks to somehow explain to Ethan that she'd taken his trust and used it to defend a project she'd never told him she controlled. As the board members filed out, Walter paused beside Claire's chair. You're fighting hard for this, he observed. I hope you remember that noble failures are still failures. They just hurt more on the way down. And I hope you remember, Claire replied quietly, that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are against you. That's called integrity, Walter. You should try it sometime. His face flushed, but he said nothing, just walked out with his shoulders rigid. Claire waited until the room emptied before letting herself slump in her chair, the adrenaline that had carried her through the presentation draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd bought time, but what she'd really bought was 2 weeks to either become the person Ethan thought she was or reveal herself as just another developer who saw people as demographics and communities as profit opportunities. The choice felt paralyzingly clear. By noon, Claire was back in her office, staring at Ethan's portfolio spread across her desk. She'd promised to return it that afternoon, but now the thought of facing him made her stomach churn. How did you hand back someone's trust after using it as ammunition in a battle they didn't even know you were fighting? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. Hey, it's Ethan. Got your number from the garden volunteer list. Hope that's okay. Just checking if you still have time to return the portfolio today. Lily wants to show you her new painting when you come by. Claire stared at the message, guilt twisting deeper. He thought she was coming by as a friend, maybe even as someone who'd become part of their small world. He had no idea she was the CEO who controlled whether his neighborhood stayed a community or became another victim of gentrification with good marketing. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on the truth, or at least part of it. Claire. The meeting went better than expected. I can bring the portfolio by around 4 if that works, and I'd love to see Lily's painting. Ethan. Perfect. We're at 2847 S.E. Hawthorne, apartment 3B. Fair warning, the building's nothing fancy. Nothing fancy turned out to be an understatement. The apartment building was a 3-story walk-up from the 1970s, its brown siding faded and its parking lot cracked. But the entrance was clean. Someone had planted flowers in window boxes, and children's chalk drawings decorated the sidewalk in bright, cheerful colors. Claire climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, Ethan's portfolio under one arm and a bag of pastries from a bakery she'd passed in the other. A peace offering, though he didn't yet know she needed forgiveness. She knocked on 3B, and the door flew open to reveal Lily in paint-splattered overalls, her hair held back by a headband that was losing its battle against her curls. You came! Lily grabbed her hand and pulled her inside before Claire could respond. Daddy, Miss Claire's here, with fancy cookies. The apartment was small but lived in the best way. Bookshelves overflowing with architecture texts and children's stories. A couch that had clearly seen better days but was covered in soft blankets. Crayon drawings taped to every available wall surface. Through a doorway, Claire glimpsed a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and beyond that, 2 bedrooms. Both doors open to show spaces that were cramped but carefully organized. This was what affordable housing actually looked like. Not theoretical units on a spreadsheet, but real spaces where real families made real lives. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and Claire's breath caught at how different he looked here. More relaxed, more himself, like he'd shed some layer of formality he wore in public. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Thanks for coming by. How did the meeting go?" "I bought myself 2 weeks," Claire said, handing him the portfolio with relief at finally having it out of her possession. "Your designs made the difference. Several board members were genuinely impressed." "Really?" Ethan's face lit up in a way that made Claire's guilt intensify. "They actually considered community-integrated elements?" "They did, because you made them see how it could work, not just philosophically, but practically." "Miss Claire, come see." Lily was tugging at her hand again, leading her toward the corner that had been set up as an art space. An easel held a canvas covered in bold, joyful strokes, a garden scene with flowers in impossible colors, and stick figures that were clearly meant to be people. "That's you," Lily pointed at a figure with brown hair and a purple dress. "And that's Daddy, and that's me, and that's the garden where we planted roses. See? I remembered the fountain in the middle." Claire knelt to examine the painting more closely, her throat tight. "It's beautiful, Lily. You're really talented." "Daddy says I got Mommy's artistic eye, but his attention to detail. That's good, because then I have both of them in me, even though she's gone." The casual wisdom of children, stating profound truths like simple facts. Claire looked up to find Ethan watching them both, his expression soft but edged with something sadder. "She's right," he said quietly. "Sarah was the artist. I just borrowed her vision and tried to make it structural." "That's not borrowing," Claire said. "That's honoring her." They moved to the small living room, Lily settling between them on the couch with her sketchbook, humming while she drew. Ethan made tea, green with mint, the same kind he'd shared at the garden, and for a while they just sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily create worlds in crayon and marker. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said eventually. "About your project. The one you're fighting for." Claire's stomach tightened. "Of course. What happens if you lose? If the board decides to go with the conventional approach instead of community integration? Then 20 acres of potential becomes just another development that prices out the people who actually need housing," Claire said, the bitterness clear in her voice. "Families like—" She stopped herself just in time. "Families like yours," she'd almost said. "Families who deserved better than cramped apartments and aging buildings, who deserved the kind of community-centered spaces Ethan had designed." "Families like mine?" Ethan finished for her, his tone gentle but knowing. "It's okay to say it, Claire. I know what affordable housing means because I live it. This place costs me $1,800 a month, which is about all I can manage on a grocery store salary. It's not much, but it's home. Lily's school is 3 blocks away, the neighbors look out for each other, and we're part of a community even if the building's falling apart." "You shouldn't have to choose between affordability and quality," Claire said fiercely. "That's the whole point of what I'm trying to build. Spaces that serve people across income levels, that don't segregate families based on what they can pay." "That's a good dream," Ethan said. "But dreams are expensive, Claire. Someone always has to pay for them. What if it didn't have to be just one group paying? What if we designed it so that everyone contributed and everyone benefited? Your thesis showed how it could work. Market rate units subsidizing affordable ones, commercial spaces funding community amenities, everything integrated so it's not charity, it's community." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You really believe in this project, don't you?" "I have to," Claire said quietly. "Because if I don't, if I can't prove that development can serve people instead of just extracting profit from them, then what's the point of any of it? I might as well just build luxury condos and call it a day." "Then I hope you win," Ethan said. "Whatever you're up against, whatever obstacles you're facing, I hope you find a way through. Because people like me, people in neighborhoods like this, we need advocates. We need people with power and resources who actually give a damn about whether we have decent places to live." The irony burned. He was thanking her for caring while she sat in his cramped apartment, using his ideas to defend a project she'd never told him she controlled. She was exactly the kind of person with power and resources he was talking about, and she'd gained his trust through deception. "Ethan, I need to tell you something," Claire started, the confession right there on her tongue. But Lily chose that moment to hold up her sketchbook, revealing a drawing of a building with gardens on every level and happy stick figures in every window. "This is what I want to live in when I grow up," she announced. "A place where everyone has flowers and you can see your neighbors and nobody's sad about where they live." Claire looked at the drawing, at Lily's hopeful face, at Ethan's expression of mingled pride and pain. She opened her mouth to tell the truth, to admit that she was Claire Monroe, that Hearthlight was her project, that she'd been using their friendship to gather ammunition for a battle she should have been honest about from the start. But her phone buzzed with violent insistence, Jessica's name flashing urgent. "I'm sorry, I have to," Claire answered. "Jessica? Claire, where are you? Marcus just got a call from one of Walter's people. They're trying to line up contractors willing to commit to Walter's version of Hearthlight before the next board meeting. If they can show the board that implementation is ready to go, they can force an immediate vote." They can't do that. The board agreed to 2 weeks. Walter's claiming he's just being prepared, exploring all options. But if he comes to the next meeting with signed contracts and you only have theoretical plans, you know how the vote will go. Claire stood, her heart pounding. "I need contractor estimates. Multiple bids on the community integrated design. Can you get me meetings this week?" "I'll try, but Claire, most of the reputable firms are already juggling projects. Getting them to commit time to a proposal that might not even get approved. Offer premium rates for rush estimates, whatever it takes." Claire was already gathering her things, the moment for confession evaporating as crisis took over. "I'll be back at the office in 20 minutes. She ended the call to find Ethan watching her with concern. "Everything okay?" "Work emergency. Again. I'm sorry, I have to go." Claire paused at the door, looking back at him and Lily on the couch, at the life they'd built in this small space, at everything she was fighting for, and everyone she was lying to in the process. "Thank you for trusting me with your designs. They're going to make a real difference." "Just make sure they're used for something that matters," Ethan said. "That's all I ask." "I will," Claire promised, and fled before she could say anything else that would deepen the deception or force the truth she wasn't ready to face. The week that followed was a controlled sprint toward disaster. Claire met with contractors, revised budgets, negotiated with suppliers, all while trying to maintain the appearance that everything was proceeding normally. Marcus worked 18-hour days running cost analyses. Patricia called in favors with construction firms she'd worked with for decades. Even Jessica, who usually maintained careful professional boundaries, started sending encouraging texts at 2 a.m. when they were both still working. But every small victory felt hollow when Claire remembered the look on Ethan's face as he'd handed over his portfolio, the trust in his eyes when he'd said he hoped she won. She'd become exactly what she'd always despised, someone who used people's goodwill to serve her own agenda, who took without giving, who measured relationships in terms of utility rather than genuine connection. Thursday afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Claire Monroe." Her voice was clipped, exhausted. "Claire? It's Dorothy, from the garden." Claire sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Dorothy, hi. Is everything okay?" "That depends on your definition of okay." Dorothy's voice was carefully neutral. "I'm calling because Ethan mentioned you've been asking questions about community development, and I thought you should know something before you make any big decisions." "I'm listening." "The Hearthlight project, the one that's supposed to revitalize our neighborhood. Word on the street is that the company behind it is getting ready to cut all the community elements and turn it into just another market-rate development that'll price out everyone who actually lives here." Claire's blood ran cold. "Where did you hear that?" "Contractors have been calling around, asking about availability for modified specs. Our neighborhood association has contacts, Claire. We pay attention when developers start changing their promises." "Dorothy, I'm not asking you to betray any professional confidences," Dorothy interrupted. "I'm asking you as someone who seemed to care about our garden, about our community. If you have any influence with Monroe Development Group, if you know anyone there who might listen, we need advocates. We need people willing to fight for us, not just pay lip service while they figure out how to make money off our displacement." The words landed like physical blows. Claire pressed her hand to her forehead, the weight of her own deception crushing. "What if I told you," she said slowly, "that there are people inside the company fighting to preserve the community elements, that the battle isn't over yet?" Then I'd say they need to fight harder, because what I'm hearing is that the money people are winning and the community is about to lose. Again. Dorothy's voice softened. "I like you, Claire. You showed up at the garden and you worked, really worked, like you cared. But caring isn't enough if you can't or won't do anything about it." "I'm doing everything I can," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I hope it's enough, for all our sakes." The call ended, leaving Claire sitting in her office as afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating the city she'd helped reshape without ever really seeing the people who lived in it. On her desk, Ethan's portfolio sat where she'd placed it after scanning every page, borrowing every idea, using his vision to defend a project he didn't know she controlled. She'd spent years building a reputation as someone who cared about community-centered development, who wanted to make architecture serve people instead of just profit. But when had she last actually talked to the people her buildings were supposed to serve? When had she sat in their homes, seen how they lived, understood what they actually needed instead of what she thought they should want? Ethan had shown her all of that, and she'd repaid him with lies and omissions, taking his trust and turning it into leverage. Claire pulled out her phone and opened a new message to Ethan. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she started typing. "Claire, can we meet? There's something I need to tell you about my project. Something I should have told you from the beginning." She stared at the unsent message, her thumb hovering over the send button. Once she sent this, there was no going back. The truth would be out, and whatever fragile connection they'd built would either survive or shatter. But before she could decide, Marcus burst into her office, his face pale. "Claire, we have a problem. Walter just sent an email to the entire board. He's calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Says he has new information that makes delaying the vote fiscally irresponsible." "What new information?" "I don't know, but—" Marcus hesitated. "Claire, I think someone's been leaking our revised plans to him. The email references specific cost projections that only our team should have." The betrayal hit like ice water. Someone on her own team, someone she'd trusted, was feeding information to Walter, and whatever he'd learned had given him enough ammunition to force a confrontation before she was ready. Claire deleted the unsent message to Ethan. There was no time for confessions or truth-telling now. There was only the fight, and she was about to walk into it with both hands tied and her most important ally still completely in the dark about who she really was. Tomorrow morning would bring either victory or devastation. Either way, the lies were about to catch up with her, and she had no idea which scared her more: losing the project she'd invested everything in, or losing the trust of a man who'd shown her what it meant to live with integrity. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 a.m. sharp in a conference room that suddenly felt smaller and more hostile than Claire remembered. She'd arrived early, her presentation materials organized with the desperate precision of someone who knew she was fighting from a position of weakness. Marcus sat to her right, his jaw tight with tension. Patricia had claimed the seat to her left, a small act of solidarity that Claire appreciated more than she could express. Walter Reed stood at the head of the table, radiating the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. The other board members filtered in with expressions ranging from curious to resigned, and Claire knew before anyone spoke that she'd already lost half of them. The question was whether she could win back enough to survive the vote. "Thank you all for accommodating this schedule change," Walter began, his voice carrying that particular tone of false regret that meant he was enjoying himself. "I know we agreed to give Claire 2 weeks, but circumstances have forced my hand. I've received information that fundamentally changes our assessment of the Hearthlight project's viability." He pulled up a presentation, and Claire's stomach dropped as she recognized her own revised budget projections displayed on the screen. Not the polished final version she'd planned to present, but the working drafts, complete with notes about potential risks and areas where costs remained uncertain. "These documents," Walter continued, "were provided to me by a concerned member of Claire's team who felt the board deserved to see the full picture before we committed to an expensive redesign. As you can see, even with the community-integrated elements, We're looking at cost overruns of at least 15%, timeline extensions of 8 months, and significant uncertainty around contractor availability. Claire felt Marcus stiffen beside her. Someone on her team had betrayed her, and the working documents made her carefully constructed arguments look amateurish and unprepared. "I'd like to know," Claire said, her voice cutting through Walter's presentation, "which member of my team violated confidentiality agreements to provide you with internal working documents?" "That's not relevant to this discussion," Walter replied smoothly. "It's extremely relevant. Those documents were preliminary analyses, not final recommendations. Taking them out of context fundamentally misrepresents the actual proposal." "Then perhaps you should have been more careful about what you committed to paper," Walter said, "or more selective about who you trusted with sensitive information." The barb landed, but Claire refused to let him see it hit. "If we're discussing trust and transparency, perhaps we should talk about why you're rushing this vote. The board agreed to 2 weeks. We still have 9 days remaining." "The board agreed to 2 weeks assuming you could deliver a viable alternative," James Kowalski interjected. "These documents suggest you can't. Why waste time on proposals that aren't financially sound?" "Because those documents are incomplete," Patricia said, her voice sharp. "Claire, do you have the actual final projections?" Claire pulled up her own presentation, the one she'd planned to deliver at the scheduled meeting. The numbers were better than the leaked documents showed. She'd found contractors willing to commit, suppliers offering discounted rates for the community elements, even a grant program that could offset some development costs. It wasn't perfect, but it was viable. For the next 40 minutes, she walked the board through revised plans that incorporated Ethan's design philosophy while addressing every financial concern Walter had raised. She showed case studies from similar projects, including detailed analysis of Horizon Plaza's long-term performance. She presented tenant satisfaction data proving that community-integrated developments had lower turnover and higher property values over time. But she could see it wasn't enough. The leak had poisoned the well, made her look unprepared and desperate. Even Patricia's supportive questions couldn't overcome the impression that Claire was scrambling to salvage a fundamentally flawed proposal. "I appreciate the effort you've put into this," Linda Martinez said when Claire finished, her tone suggesting the opposite. "But I have to agree with Walter. The numbers are concerning, the timeline is uncertain, and we're asking our shareholders to accept significant risk for returns that remain theoretical." "The returns aren't theoretical," Claire countered. "Every comparable project has outperformed conventional developments over 10-year periods. We're not asking shareholders to accept risk, we're asking them to invest in sustainable value creation." "Sustainable value creation doesn't pay my bills next quarter," James said bluntly. "I'm here to protect shareholder interests, not to fund social experiments." "This isn't a social experiment," Claire said, fighting to keep her voice level. "It's good business wrapped in ethical development practice. The two aren't mutually exclusive." "They are when one costs 30% more than the other," Walter said. He pulled up another slide, this one showing his revised Hearthlight proposal side by side with Claire's. "The board has a clear choice. We can proceed with a conventional development that delivers predictable returns on a proven timeline, or we can gamble on an expensive redesign based on theoretical benefits and borrowed architectural concepts." "Borrowed?" Claire's voice sharpened. "Those designs were provided by an architect with extensive experience in community integration, the same architect who led community design on Horizon Plaza." And where is this architect now?" Walter asked. "Why aren't they here to defend their own work? Why are we relying on you to interpret someone else's vision?" The question landed like a trap closing. Claire had no good answer that didn't involve admitting she'd been using Ethan's work without his knowledge or explicit permission, that she'd taken his trust and turned it into ammunition for a corporate battle he didn't even know existed. "The architect in question preferred to remain anonymous," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "How convenient," Walter replied. "An anonymous expert whose credentials we can't verify, whose availability we can't confirm, whose designs we're supposed to bet millions of dollars on based solely on your recommendation." "I can verify the credentials," Patricia said. "I was involved in the Horizon Plaza project. If Claire says this architect was lead on community design, I believe her." "Your belief isn't enough," James said. "We need names, contracts, commitments, not vague assurances and borrowed sketches." Claire felt the room slipping away from her. She'd fought so hard to preserve Hearthlight's vision, but she'd built her defense on a foundation of deception, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. "I propose we vote," Walter said. "Two options. Proceed with my revised proposal, which contractors are ready to begin next month, or continue deliberating on Claire's alternative while our competition moves forward on similar properties." "That's not a fair choice," Claire protested. "You're framing this as action versus inaction when it's really about long-term value versus short-term profit." "I'm framing it as certainty versus uncertainty," Walter corrected, "which is exactly how our shareholders will see it." The vote was called. Claire watched hands rise in favor of Walter's proposal, each one feeling like a nail in Hearthlight's coffin. Patricia voted against, as did Robert Park, surprisingly. But the final count was 7-2 in Walter's favor. It was over. 2 years of work, months of fighting, weeks of desperate scrambling to save a vision that mattered. All of it dismantled in a 40-minute meeting by a man who saw communities as demographic data and families as market segments. "The revised Hearthlight proposal is approved," Walter announced. "Claire, I'll need your team to begin coordination with contractors next week. Let's try to make this transition as smooth as possible." The words were professional, but his eyes held triumph. He'd won, and they both knew it. Claire gathered her materials with mechanical precision, refusing to let anyone see how completely devastated she felt. Marcus murmured something about regrouping, but she barely heard him. Patricia touched her shoulder in silent sympathy, but Claire couldn't respond. She walked out of this conference room into the corridor, past her assistant's concerned expression, into her office where she closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the defeat. She'd failed. Failed the project, failed the community, failed every promise she'd made about building developments that actually served people. And worst of all, she'd failed Ethan, who trusted her with something precious and watched her use it to fight a battle she'd lost anyway. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Jessica, I'm so sorry, Claire. For what it's worth, you fought the good fight. But good fights that ended in loss were just expensive failures, and Claire had never felt more like a failure in her life." She was still standing there, staring at nothing, when her phone rang. Dorothy's name on the screen. Claire almost didn't answer, couldn't bear to hear the disappointment, but years of professional conditioning made her pick up. "Dorothy, is it true?" Dorothy's voice was tight, controlled. "The neighborhood association just heard from someone at Monroe Development. They're saying the vote went through, that Hearthlight's being redesigned as market rate." "It's true." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I tried to stop it. I fought as hard as I could, but I lost." "You lost?" Dorothy repeated the words like she was testing their weight. "So that's it? You fought and lost, and now you're just accepting it?" "What else can I do? The board voted. The decision is made." "You can quit," Dorothy said bluntly. "You can walk away from a company that just voted to displace families for profit. You can stand up and say this isn't who you are or what you believe in." "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," Dorothy interrupted. "Either you believe in what you were fighting for, or you don't. Either you have principles, or you have a paycheck. You can't have both when they're pointing in opposite directions." The words hit like a slap, sharp and clarifying. Claire opened her mouth to argue, to explain about complexity and nuance and the realities of corporate leadership, but all of it rang hollow against Dorothy's fundamental challenge. What did she actually believe in? What was she willing to sacrifice to maintain those beliefs? "I need to think," Claire said finally. "Then think fast," Dorothy replied, "because in about 2 hours, I'm calling a community meeting to talk about what we're going to do about this. And I'd really like to be able to tell people that at least one person inside that company still gives a damn about us." The call ended. Claire stood in her office looking out at the Portland skyline, at the city she'd helped reshape without ever really understanding the human cost of that reshaping. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably at work at Parkside Market, helping customers and solving small crises, living a life of quiet integrity that put her corporate ethics to shame. She'd used him, taken his trust and his designs and his vision, and used it all to fight a battle she'd lost anyway. And she still hadn't told him the truth about who she was or what his work had been used for. Claire pulled out her phone and typed a message before she could talk herself out of it. "Claire, can you meet me tonight? there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you from the beginning. I understand if you don't want to see me after you hear it, but you deserve the truth." She hit send before she could reconsider, then sat down at her desk and began drafting a different kind of document. Not a budget proposal or a presentation, but a resignation letter that would either be the stupidest decision of her career or the first honest choice she'd made in years. The response from Ethan came 20 minutes later. "Ethan, Lily has art class until 6. Meet me at Grounded after? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." The kindness in those words, the automatic assumption that they were on the same side, that problems were things to be solved together rather than obstacles to be overcome alone, made Claire's throat tight. She didn't deserve that generosity, not after what she'd done, but maybe that was exactly why she had to face it. The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness. Claire went through the motions of responding to emails, attending calls, maintaining the fiction that everything was normal, while her world realigned around a single terrible truth. She'd become exactly what she'd always despised, the kind of leader who sacrificed principles for pragmatism, who used people's trust as currency, who measured success in profit margins rather than lives improved. At 5:30, she left the office without explanation, ignoring Jessica's surprised expression and Marcus's concerned questions. The drive to Grounded felt both too long and too short, time stretching and compressing in ways that made her dizzy. Ethan was already there when she arrived, sitting in the same worn leather chair by the window, 2 cups of coffee on the table between them. He looked up when she entered, and his smile faded as he saw her expression. "Claire, what's wrong?" She sat down heavily, the weight of what she had to say pressing against her chest. "I lied to you," she said without preamble. "Not directly, but through omission, which is maybe worse. And I used you, used your trust in your work for something I never told you about." Ethan's expression shifted, wariness replacing warmth. "I'm listening." "My name is Claire Monroe," she began, the full truth finally forcing its way out. "I'm not just someone who works in development. I'm the CEO of Monroe Development Group, the company that owns the Hearthlight project. The project I've been asking you about, getting your advice on, borrowing your designs for. It's mine. It's always been mine." The silence that followed felt like falling. Ethan stared at her, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "You're—" He stopped, shook his head. "The Hearthlight project. The one that's supposed to bring affordable housing and community spaces to my neighborhood. You've been in charge of that this entire time." "Yes. And you never thought to mention it? When we were talking about community design, when I was showing you my thesis work, when you borrowed my portfolio to help with a presentation, you never thought that maybe I deserved to know you weren't just some interested developer. You were the person making the actual decisions." "I should have told you immediately," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I know that. I knew it then. But at first I didn't want my title to change how you talked to me, how you shared your ideas. And then the longer I waited, the harder it became to find the right moment. So you just kept lying. I kept telling myself I'd explain later, that I'd tell you once the project was secure, once I could show you what your designs had helped create." "My designs?" Ethan's voice rose, sharp with anger. "You used my work? Without asking, without telling me what it was for?" "I had your permission to borrow the portfolio. For a presentation, not to defend a project I didn't even know you controlled." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "Do you have any idea how this feels? I trusted you, Claire. I showed you something precious, something I haven't shared with anyone in years, and you took it and used it for corporate warfare without even having the decency to tell me what you were doing." "You're right," Claire whispered. "You're absolutely right. I betrayed your trust, and I have no excuse. Did you ever care?" Ethan turned to face her, his eyes hard. "About the garden, about our conversations, about any of it? Or was it all just research for your project?" "No," Claire said fiercely. "It was real, Ethan. Everything I felt, everything I learned from you, that was real. The project became something more because of you, because you showed me what community actually means instead of what I thought it should mean. And where is that project now?" His voice was cold. "Did my designs help? Did all that trust I gave you actually matter?" This was the worst part, The part where she had to admit that not only had she used him, she'd failed anyway. The board voted this morning to proceed with a conventional development. Everything I fought to preserve, the community center, the gardens, the affordable units, they're gutting it all. I lost, Ethan. And I lost using your work without your permission and without even giving you credit for it. Ethan sank back into his chair, his anger deflating into something that looked like exhausted disappointment. So that's it? They vote to displace families and you just accept it? I don't know what else I can do. You can quit, he said, echoing Dorothy's words. You can refuse to be part of something that contradicts everything you told me you believed in. It's not that simple. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me. Everyone has responsibilities, Claire. His voice was quiet but firm. I had a career I loved, recognition I'd worked years to achieve, and I walked away because my responsibilities to my daughter mattered more. You're telling me your responsibility to a paycheck matters more than your principles? That's not fair. I've been fighting for this project for 2 years, and you lost. I get it. But the question isn't what you fought for. It's what you're willing to do now that the fight is over. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. Who are you, Claire Monroe? Are you the person who sat in my apartment and talked about building spaces that serve people? Or are you the CEO who will implement whatever the board decides, regardless of what it costs the community? The question hung between them, and Claire realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she didn't know the answer. She'd spent so long being CEO Claire Monroe, making strategic decisions and balancing stakeholder interests, that she'd forgotten how to be just Claire, the woman who'd gotten into this field because she believed architecture could change lives. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted. I thought I did. I thought I was fighting the good fight, trying to do right while working within the system. But maybe I've just been complicit all along. Then figure it out, Ethan said. Because I can't. I can't trust someone who doesn't know what they stand for. And I definitely can't trust someone who uses people without telling them the truth. He stood, gathering his jacket. Claire reached out instinctively, but he stepped back. Ethan, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but you're right, he interrupted. You don't. Not yet. Maybe not ever, but that's not the point. The point is what you do next. Whether you find a way to make this right, or whether you go back to your office and help implement a development that'll price people like me out of our own neighborhood. I can't fix the board's decision. I don't have that power. Then find different power, Ethan said, or accept that you're exactly who I'm afraid you are. Someone who talks about principles but abandons them the moment they become inconvenient. He walked out, leaving Claire alone with 2 cups of coffee and the wreckage of whatever connection they'd been building. Through the window, she watched him cross the street to the art studio where Lily waited, watched him paste on a smile for his daughter, even though she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was right about everything. She'd betrayed his trust, used his work, hidden behind omission and half-truths, while telling herself she was doing the right thing. And when the fight got hard, when the board made their choice, she'd been ready to accept defeat and move on because that was easier than taking a stand that might cost her everything. Claire pulled out her phone and opened the resignation letter she'd drafted earlier. Read it through once, twice, making small edits until it said exactly what she needed it to say. Then she forwarded it to Jessica with a simple instruction. Hold this until tomorrow morning unless I tell you otherwise. She had one night to decide who she actually was. One night to choose between the career she'd built and the principles she claimed to hold. One night to figure out if she had the courage to do what Ethan had done. Walk away from everything for something that mattered more. The coffee had gone cold by the time she stood up and walked out into the Portland evening. But for the first time in weeks, despite everything she'd lost and everything she still stood to lose, Claire felt something that might have been clarity beginning to take root. The board had made their choice. Now it was time for her to make hers. Claire drove home through streets that felt unfamiliar, despite having navigated them 1,000 times. The city looked different when you were questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself, when the carefully constructed narrative of your life had been stripped down to its foundational lie, that you could serve both profit and people without eventually having to choose between them. Her condo felt cavernous and cold when she walked in, all those expensive finishes suddenly looking like what they were, a monument to success that had cost her everything that actually mattered. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights blur through glass still streaked from yesterday's rain, and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost. Ethan's trust, the Hearthlight Project's soul, her own sense of who she was beneath the title and the tailored suits. But somewhere in that loss, something else was taking shape. Not clarity exactly, but the beginning of understanding. She'd spent 2 years fighting to preserve Hearthlight's vision while operating within a system designed to crush exactly that kind of vision. She'd tried to be both CEO and advocate, to serve shareholders and community simultaneously, and the inevitable result was that she'd failed at both. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe the only way to actually fight for what mattered was to step outside the system that made meaningful change impossible. Claire pulled out her laptop and opened the resignation letter she'd drafted earlier. Read it through one more time, her finger hovering over the send button. This was it. The moment where she either committed to the choice or retreated back into the safety of professional compromise. But before she could decide, her phone rang. Patricia's name flashing on the screen. "Patricia, if this is about transition planning for Hearthlight, I can't—" "It's not," Patricia interrupted, her voice urgent. "Claire, I need you to listen very carefully. I just got off the phone with Robert Park. He voted with Walter this morning, but he's having serious doubts. Apparently his daughter works in affordable housing advocacy, and she tore him apart when she heard about the vote." Claire's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there might be a way to reverse this. The vote was 7-2, but if we can flip 3 votes, we can force a revote. Robert's already on board. I've been working on Sandra Whitmore. Her district is pushing for more affordable housing, and she's getting pressure from constituents. That's 2. We need 1 more." "Patricia, the vote was this morning. Walter's already moving forward with contractors." "Nothing's been signed yet," Patricia said firmly. "We have maybe 48 hours before contracts are executed. If we can get a revote before then, we can still save this." "How?" Claire asked, though hope was already stirring despite her best efforts to crush it. "Walter controls the board. Even if we get 3 votes, he'll fight us every step of the way." "Let him fight. But Claire, I need you to do something you've been avoiding." Patricia's voice softened. "I need you to bring in your mystery architect, the one whose designs made the difference last time. If they're willing to present directly to the board, to put a face and a story to those beautiful drawings, it might be enough to sway Linda Martinez. She's always been swayed more by people than numbers." Claire's stomach dropped. "I can't ask him to do that." "Why not? If he's as committed to community-centered design as his work suggests." "Because I betrayed his trust," Claire said bluntly. "I used his designs without telling him what they were for. I lied to him about who I was. He found out today and he walked away, and I don't blame him." The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Claire thought the call had dropped. Then Patricia spoke, her voice careful. "Is this architect Ethan Brooks?" Claire's breath caught. "How did you—" "I worked on Horizon Plaza, remember? I knew everyone on that team. When you mentioned the lead designer on community integration, there was only one person it could be. I just didn't put it together until now." Patricia paused. "Claire, what exactly did you do?" "I met him by accident. He helped me when I was in trouble, and I started spending time with him without telling him I was the CEO behind Hearthlight. I let him think I was just another developer, and I borrowed his thesis work to defend the project without explaining what I was using it for." "Oh, Claire, I know it was wrong. I told myself I'd explain later, that I'd tell him once the project was secure, but you fell for him," Patricia said gently. "And the longer you waited, the harder it became to risk losing him by telling the truth." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Claire hadn't let herself acknowledge the feelings growing between her and Ethan, the way his presence had become something she looked forward to, the way Lily's laughter had started to feel like home. She'd told herself it was about the project, about learning from his perspective, but Patricia had seen through to the truth she'd been avoiding. "It doesn't matter how I feel," Claire said. "I destroyed whatever trust existed between us. He made it very clear that he can't forgive what I did." Did he say that, or did he say he can't forgive it yet? Claire thought back to Ethan's words in the coffee shop. Not yet. Maybe not ever, but that's not the point. The point is what you do next. He said, I need to figure out who I am, she said slowly. Whether I'm someone who talks about principles or someone who actually lives by them. And have you figured it out? Claire looked at the resignation letter still open on her laptop screen, at the city spread below her windows, at the reflection of herself in the glass. A woman in expensive clothes standing alone in an expensive apartment that felt nothing like home. I think I'm starting to. Then start by doing the right thing, Patricia said. Not the strategic thing or the safe thing, the right thing. Go to Ethan, tell him the truth about everything, including how you feel, and ask him to help us save this project. Not because it'll help your career, but because it's the right thing to do for the community he's part of. He'll say no. Maybe. But maybe he'll surprise you. And either way, you'll know you tried to make it right instead of just accepting defeat. After Patricia hung up, Claire sat with her phone in her hand, staring at Ethan's contact information like it might spontaneously reveal the right words to say. How did you ask forgiveness from someone you'd used? How did you request help from someone whose trust you'd broken? The answer came from an unexpected source, a memory of Lily at the garden, planting marigolds with serious concentration, explaining that Daddy said flowers needed 3 things to grow: good soil, enough water, and someone who cared about them. Maybe rebuilding trust was like that. You needed good foundation, consistent care, and someone willing to believe growth was possible even after everything had been broken down to roots. Claire changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a sweater, grabbed her car keys, and drove across town before she could talk herself out of it. It was nearly 8 p.m. when she pulled up outside Ethan's building, the windows glowing warm against the darkening sky. She sat in her car for a long moment, gathering courage, before finally climbing the stairs to apartment 3B. The door opened before she could knock. Ethan stood there in worn sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower, surprise and wariness warring on his face. Claire, I didn't expect— I know. I'm sorry for just showing up, but I needed to talk to you, and I was afraid if I called you'd hang up on me. The words tumbled out too fast, too desperate. Can I come in, please? He hesitated, then stepped back to let her pass. Inside, Lily sat at the small dining table, homework spread in front of her, Mr. Trunk keeping watch from his usual position. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Claire. Miss Claire, did you come to help with my math homework? Daddy's terrible at fractions. I am not terrible at fractions, Ethan protested, but his eyes stayed on Claire, guarded and uncertain. Lily, sweetheart, can you work on your reading for a few minutes? Ethan said gently. Miss Claire and I need to talk about grown-up things. Boring, Lily declared, but she gathered her books and retreated to her bedroom, Mr. Trunk tucked under her arm. Once they were alone, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Claire forced herself to meet Ethan's eyes, to not look away from the hurt she'd caused. I came to apologize, she began. Not to make excuses or ask for forgiveness I don't deserve, but to actually apologize for everything I did wrong. I lied to you through omission. I used your trust and your work for purposes I never explained. I let you believe we were building something real, while I was hiding fundamental truths about who I was and what I wanted from you. Ethan crossed his arms, his posture defensive. I appreciate the apology, but I told you this afternoon. I know what you told me, that you can't trust someone who doesn't know what they stand for. And you were right to say it. Claire took a shaky breath. I spent tonight trying to figure out who I am beneath the title and the career, and I think the answer is that I'm someone who forgot that success without integrity is just expensive failure. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, the wariness softening slightly. That's a pretty insight. What are you planning to do with it? I wrote a resignation letter. I was ready to send it, to walk away from Monroe Development rather than be part of implementing a project that contradicts everything I claim to believe in. Claire pulled out her phone, showing him the letter. But before I could send it, I got a call from Patricia Chen. She's one of the board members who voted against gutting Hearthlight. She thinks there might be a way to force a revote, to reverse the decision if we can flip 3 board members. And you're telling me this because? Because the only way it works is if you're willing to help. If you're willing to present your designs directly to the board, to put a face and a story to the vision, to make them see what they're voting to destroy. Claire met his eyes. I have no right to ask this of you, not after what I did, but I'm asking anyway because it's not about me anymore. It's about the families in your neighborhood who deserve better than to be displaced for profit. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. You used my work without permission, Claire. You took something precious and turned it into ammunition for corporate politics. Why should I trust that this time is any different? Because this time I'm telling you the truth about everything. I'm not Claire the interested developer or Claire the consultant. I'm Claire Monroe, CEO of the company that owns Hearthlight, and I'm asking you as myself, no masks, no omissions, to help me save a project that matters more than my career or my pride. She paused, then added quietly, and I'm asking because somewhere between that grocery store and the garden and your apartment, I stopped seeing you as a source of insight and started seeing you as someone I care about, someone whose opinion of me matters more than any board vote. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and true. Ethan's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope before settling back into careful neutrality. You care about me? I do. And I care about Lily. And I care about the community you're part of, not because it's good business, but because spending time with you showed me what community actually means. What it looks like when people choose to care about each other instead of just coexisting in profitable proximity. Claire's voice broke. I know I don't deserve your help or your trust, but they do. Dorothy and Mr. Rodriguez and all the families who've been waiting for someone to build housing that actually serves them instead of displaces them. Ethan walked to the window, staring out at the neighborhood lights scattered below. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. If I do this, if I agree to help, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Lily and every other kid in this neighborhood who deserves to grow up with green spaces and community centers and places that feel like home instead of just places they can afford until the rent goes up. I understand. And I need you to promise me that if we succeed, if we somehow save this project, you'll actually implement it the way it's designed. No more compromises, no more letting the board water it down. If I'm putting myself out there, putting my name and my work on the line, I need to know it's for something real. I promise, Claire said. And if the board won't commit to implementing it properly, I'll resign and take the designs with me. Find a different company, a different project, somewhere that will actually build what you've envisioned. That would destroy your career. Maybe. But keeping my career by betraying my principles would destroy something more important. Claire stepped closer, not touching but near enough that he could see the truth in her eyes. You asked me earlier who I am. I'm someone who wants to be worthy of your respect, even if I never earn back your trust. I'm someone who's tired of building monuments to wealth and wants to build something that actually matters. And I'm someone who's willing to walk away from everything I've built if that's what it takes to do the right thing. Ethan turned to face her fully, his eyes still guarded but no longer quite so hard. The board meeting would have to be soon, before Walter gets contracts signed. Wednesday morning. Patricia's calling an emergency session. She'll cite new information that warrants reconsideration, specifically the lead designer's willingness to present directly and commit to the project. Wednesday is Lily's school field trip. I promised I'd chaperone. I can ask Patricia to push it to Thursday. No. Ethan shook his head. If we're doing this, we do it before Walter has time to lock things down. I'll find another parent to chaperone. Lily will understand. I don't want you to break promises to your daughter for this. I'm not breaking promises. I'm showing her that sometimes we have to make hard choices for things that matter. That's a lesson worth learning. He crossed his arms again, but this time it looked more thoughtful than defensive. I'll need access to the site, current architectural plans, zoning restrictions, budget parameters. If I'm presenting to your board, I need to show them how my designs actually integrate with Hearthlight's existing framework. I'll get you everything tomorrow. And Ethan? Claire waited until he met her eyes. Thank you for being willing to try even after what I did. Don't thank me yet, he said quietly. We might fail. The board might vote the same way, and all of this will be for nothing. It won't be for nothing, Claire countered. Even if we lose, at least we'll know we fought for something real instead of just accepting defeat. Something almost like a smile flickered across his face. When did you get so idealistic? Someone reminded me that integrity matters more than success, that good design serves people, not profit margins, that the smallest acts of kindness can build foundations strong enough to carry weight you never imagined. Claire managed her own small smile. I had a very good teacher. The moment stretched between them, fragile but real, until Lily's voice called from her bedroom. Daddy, I finished my reading. Can Miss Claire stay for dinner? We have leftover pasta, and I want to show her my spelling words. Ethan glanced at Claire, a question in his eyes. She nodded, not trusting her voice. She can stay, he called back, but you have to set the table properly. No shortcuts. Dinner was simple. Reheated pasta with sauce from a jar, salad from a bag, bread that was a day past its best, but it felt more real than any expensive restaurant meal Claire had eaten in months. Lily chattered about her field trip, about how they were going to the science museum, and she was going to see real dinosaur bones. Ethan listened with patient attention, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just waiting for her to stop talking. This, Claire thought, watching them together, was what she'd been fighting for all along without quite understanding it. Not just affordable housing or community centers, but the ability for families like this to stay together, to build lives in neighborhoods they loved, to not be displaced every time developers decided their land was worth more than their presence. After dinner, while Ethan helped Lily with a last-minute homework crisis, Claire washed dishes in the tiny kitchen, the domesticity of it unexpectedly comforting. Through the doorway, she could hear Lily explaining her math problem with increasing frustration while Ethan patiently worked through it with her. But why do I need to know fractions? Lily demanded. When am I ever going to use 3/8 in real life? Well, when you're designing buildings, Ethan said, you need to understand proportions. Like if a room is 3/8 the size of another room, you need to know if your furniture will fit. Or if you're baking and the recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup, but you want to double it. I'm never doubling anything with fractions, Lily declared. I'm going to be an artist, and artists don't use math. Artists absolutely use math, Claire called from the kitchen. Perspective, proportion, color mixing ratios, it's all math underneath the creativity. Miss Claire, you're supposed to be on my side, Lily protested, but she was smiling. By the time Lily was finally ready for bed, Claire knew she should leave, give them their space, but Lily insisted on showing her the painting she'd been working on. A new garden scene with more figures this time, including one that was definitely meant to be Claire based on the purple dress. This is beautiful, Lily, Claire said, kneeling beside the easel. You've got real talent. Daddy says talent is just practice with good tools, Lily replied seriously. But I think some people are just born knowing how to see things beautifully. Your dad is wise, Claire said, glancing at Ethan, who stood in the doorway watching them. But you might be right too. Some people do see beauty where others just see ordinary things. After Lily was tucked in, Mr. Trunk positioned on the pillow beside her, Claire and Ethan stood in the small living room, the evening suddenly feeling both too long and not long enough. I should go, Claire said. Let you get some rest before tomorrow. Tomorrow, Ethan repeated, when I show up at your office and we try to save a project that half the board wants to kill. When we show them what's possible if they're willing to choose people over profit, Claire corrected. And Ethan, whatever happens on Wednesday, thank you for this, for dinner, for letting me be part of Lily's evening, for showing me what actually matters. He walked her to the door, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Don't give up before the fight, Claire. We've got 2 days to build something that'll make them listen. Let's make it count. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Ethan arrived at Claire's office Tuesday morning with a portfolio twice the size of his original thesis, filled with detailed renderings that showed exactly how his community-centered design philosophy could integrate with Hearthlight's existing plans. He'd worked through the night, Claire realized, seeing the careful annotations and revised calculations that addressed every potential objection. They worked side by side in her conference room, Marcus providing updated budget figures, Patricia offering strategic advice about which board members to target. Ethan transformed Claire's corporate presentation into something that told a story, not just about square footage and profit margins, but about families finding homes and communities building connections and neighborhoods becoming places people chose to stay instead of places they had to leave. By Tuesday evening, they had something compelling. Not perfect, There were still cost concerns, timeline questions, risk assessments that couldn't be completely eliminated, but real. A vision backed by practical implementation, idealism grounded in achievable reality. "This might actually work," Marcus said, reviewing the final presentation. "I mean, it's still a risk, but it's a calculated risk with serious potential upside." "Walter won't give up easily," Patricia warned. "He'll fight this with everything he has." "Let him fight," Claire said. "We're not asking the board to choose between profit and people anymore. We're showing them they can have both if they're willing to think beyond quarterly returns." That night, Claire drove Ethan home, neither of them speaking much, the weight of tomorrow's battle pressing against them both. When she pulled up outside his building, he didn't immediately get out. "Thank you," he said finally, "for fighting for this, for being willing to risk your career for something that matters." "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for," Claire replied. "For showing me what I'd forgotten about why I got into this field in the first place." "Claire," he turned to face her fully, "when this is over, win or lose, we need to talk. Really talk about what's happened between us, about what it means, about whether there's something real here or just crisis bringing us together." "I'd like that," Claire said softly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'd really like that." Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of Portland winter day where everything felt sharp-edged and precise. Claire dressed with extra care, her best suit, her strongest armor, but left her hair down the way Lily had said she liked it, a small reminder of what she was fighting for. The boardroom filled exactly as it had before, the same faces carrying the same prejudices and priorities. But this time, Ethan was there too, sitting beside Claire at the conference table in slacks and a button-down that were probably the nicest clothes he owned, his portfolio in front of him and a quiet determination in his eyes. Walter's face when he saw Ethan was almost worth everything Claire had endured. Shock, recognition, calculation. She watched him realize that his comfortable victory was about to become a real fight. "I wasn't aware we were bringing in outside consultants," Walter said tightly. "The board agreed to consider all viable alternatives," Patricia replied smoothly. "This is Ethan Brooks, lead designer on the Horizon Plaza community integration elements. He's agreed to present revised plans for Hearthlight that address the concerns raised in our previous meeting." "We already voted." "We voted based on incomplete information," Robert Park interrupted. "I've asked Patricia to call this meeting because I believe the board deserves to see fully developed alternatives before we proceed with contract execution." "Seconded," Sandra Whitmore added. Walter's jaw tightened, but he sat back in his chair with forced calm. "Very well, let's see these alternatives." What followed was the most important presentation of Claire's life, except she barely spoke. This was Ethan's show, his vision, his voice, his passion making the case for why Hearthlight mattered beyond profit margins. He started by showing photos of the current Hearthlight site, vacant lots and crumbling pavement, forgotten ground that held so much potential. Then he walked them through his designs, but instead of technical specifications, he told stories about Mrs. Chen, who couldn't afford the delivery fees on her groceries, about families working 2 jobs and still barely scraping by, about children like Lily, who deserved green spaces and community centers, and places that made them feel valued instead of just tolerated. "Community-integrated development isn't charity," Ethan explained, his voice steady and clear. "It's sound business practice that recognizes long-term value over short-term extraction. Tenants who feel invested in their communities stay longer, maintain properties better, create the kind of neighborhood stability that increases property values for everyone." He showed case studies, including detailed analysis of Horizon Plaza's performance over 5 years. Lower turnover, higher satisfaction scores, property values that had appreciated faster than comparable conventional developments. "The question isn't whether we can afford to build community-centered housing," Ethan concluded. "The question is whether we can afford not to. Because every family we displace, every community we fragment for profit, that's not just a social cost. That's a market failure. We're leaving money on the table by ignoring the demand for housing that actually serves people instead of just extracting maximum rent." The room was silent when he finished. Claire watched board members exchange glances, saw Linda Martinez lean forward with genuine interest, noticed even James Kowalski nodding slowly at some of Ethan's points. Walter cleared his throat. These are impressive presentations, Mr. Brooks. I don't deny that. But impressive doesn't mean feasible. The timeline concerns, the cost uncertainties, are addressed in the revised implementation plan, Claire interjected, pulling up the detailed project schedule. We've secured commitments from 3 contractors willing to work within the modified budget. We've identified grant funding that can offset 15% of community element costs, and we've built in contingencies for every major risk factor. Contingencies that eat into profit margins, Walter countered. Contingencies that protect against catastrophic loss, Patricia corrected, which is exactly what we'd face if we build a conventional development in a market that's increasingly demanding sustainable, community-centered housing. I move that we vote to rescind the previous approval and proceed with the Community Integrated Plan, Robert Park said formally. Seconded, Sandra Whitmore added immediately. Walter's face flushed. This is highly irregular. We can't just overturn votes because someone tells a compelling story. We can and should overturn votes when presented with better information, Linda Martinez said, surprising everyone. I've reviewed Mr. Brooks's credentials. He's not just a storyteller, he's a proven designer whose work has demonstrable success. And frankly, Walter, I'm tired of building developments that create problems instead of solving them. The vote was called. Claire held her breath as hands rose, counting silently. Robert, Patricia, Sandra, Linda, 4 in favor. James abstaining rather than voting against, clearly swayed but not ready to fully commit. Michael and 2 others voting with Walter. It came down to a tie, which meant the proposal failed. Claire's heart sank, but before Walter could declare victory, Patricia spoke up. As board member who called this meeting, I have the right to cast a tie-breaking vote in emergency sessions per our bylaws. I vote in favor of the Community Integrated Plan. Walter shot to his feet. That's a procedural technicality. That's our actual rules, Patricia replied calmly. The motion passes 5-4. Hearthlight will proceed with community integrated development as designed by Mr. Brooks and implemented by Claire's team. The room erupted in arguments and objections, but Claire barely heard them. They'd won. Against every odd, despite every mistake she'd made, they'd actually won. She looked at Ethan, who was staring at Patricia with an expression of shocked disbelief. When his eyes met Claire's, something shifted, the guardedness finally cracking to reveal genuine joy underneath. We did it, he whispered. You did it, Claire corrected. Your vision, your designs, your willingness to fight for something real. Our fight, he said firmly, together. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. After the meeting dissolved into logistics planning and Walter's angry departure, Claire found herself alone with Ethan in her office, both of them still processing what had just happened. I need to go pick up Lily from school, Ethan said. Explain why I missed her field trip, though I think she'll understand when I tell her we saved the neighborhood. Tell her I'm sorry I took you away from her day, Claire said. Tell her yourself. Ethan smiled, the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen since the truth came out. Come to dinner tonight, real dinner, where we actually talk about what happens next, for the project and for us. Us, Claire repeated, hope blooming. If there's going to be an us, Ethan clarified, which I think I'd like there to be, if you're willing to be patient while I figure out how to trust you again. I'm willing, Claire said immediately, for as long as it takes. That evening, Claire showed up at apartment 3B with flowers for Lily and Chinese takeout for dinner. Lily threw her arms around Claire's waist the moment the door opened, chattering about how Daddy had called her during lunch to tell her they'd saved the neighborhood, and did that mean they could stay in their apartment forever? Not this apartment, Ethan said gently, but maybe we'll get to move to a new one in the Hearthlight development, one with a bigger kitchen and a yard where you can plant flowers. Can Miss Claire live near us? Lily asked, her innocent question landing with unexpected weight. Maybe, Ethan said, his eyes on Claire. If she wants to. I'd like that, Claire said softly. I'd like that very much. Over dinner, they talked about implementation timelines and design modifications, but also about smaller things. Lily's upcoming art show, Ethan's idea to teach a community architecture workshop, Claire's plan to actually get to know the families who'd be living in the spaces she approved. After Lily went to bed, Claire and Ethan sat on the worn couch, closer than professional distance, but not yet touching. both of them navigating the uncertain space between hurt and healing. I meant what I said this morning, Ethan began, about wanting there to be an us, but I need you to understand that trust doesn't just come back because we won a board vote. I know, Claire said, and I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn it back. One honest conversation, one kept promise, one moment of showing up at a time. That could take a while. I've got time. And Ethan? Claire finally reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that I'm someone worthy of it. Someone who fights for what matters, who tells the truth even when it's hard, who shows up for people instead of just using them. That's a big promise. Then watch me keep it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. My wife used to say that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. Choosing to show up, choosing to be honest, choosing to put someone else's needs alongside your own. He looked at her directly. I don't know if what we have is love yet, but I think it could be if we both choose to build it on honesty instead of convenience. I choose honesty, Claire said. I choose showing up. I choose figuring this out together instead of pretending I have all the answers. Then let's start there, Ethan said, and see what we can build. The kiss, when it finally came, was gentle and tentative and sweet. Not an ending or even a beginning, but a foundation. The first careful brick in a structure they'd build together, one honest choice at a time. 6 months later, Claire stood in the middle of what used to be vacant lots, watching construction crews frame out the first Hearthlight buildings. Ethan was there too, wearing a hard hat and consulting with contractors about sightlines and green space integration, his professional confidence returning as the project took shape. Lily ran between the marked garden plots, Mr. Trunk tucked under her arm, explaining to anyone who'd listened that her daddy had designed this whole place and it was going to be the best neighborhood ever. Claire had resigned from Monroe Development Group 3 months earlier, not in defeat but in deliberate choice. She'd started her own firm, smaller, leaner, committed exclusively to community-centered projects. Hearthlight was her first major client, but there were others in the pipeline, neighborhoods across Portland and beyond that were tired of being treated as profit centers instead of communities. The work was harder without a corporate infrastructure behind her. The pay was significantly less. But every morning she woke up knowing exactly what she stood for and who she was fighting for, and that made all the difference. Claire, Dorothy called from where she was consulting with the landscape architect about the community garden layout. Come settle an argument about whether we need raised beds or ground-level plots. Both, Claire called back, having learned that community design meant accommodating different needs rather than forcing everyone into the same solution. We'll do a mix so everyone can choose what works for them. She felt Ethan's hand slip into hers, their fingers lacing together with the easy familiarity of 6 months spent rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. They'd gone slowly, carefully, learning each other honestly instead of through the filter of professional necessity or crisis. It wasn't perfect. They still argued about design priorities, still struggled with balancing his need for stability against her tendency to overwork. But it was real. Mom wants to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner, Ethan said. His mother had moved back to Portland 2 months ago to be closer to Lily, and she'd adopted Claire with the same matter-of-fact warmth she showed everyone. Wouldn't miss it, Claire said. Though I should warn you, I promised Lily I'd help her pick out plants for her section of the garden this weekend. She's going to have you planting every flower in existence. Good. I need the practice, and the reminder of why this matters. Ethan pulled her closer, kissing her temple. You're doing good work, Claire Monroe. Work that matters. I'm proud of you. The word settled warm in her chest. Not CEO anymore. Not corporate success story. Just Claire. Someone trying to build spaces that served people instead of just extracting profit from them. Someone who'd learned that real integrity meant choosing what mattered over what was easy. Someone who'd found home not in expensive condos or professional achievements, but in communities built on care and trust and the radical belief that everyone deserved dignity. As the sun began to set over the Hearthlight site, turning the skeletal frames of future homes golden, Claire watched Lily chase butterflies between the marked pathways, while Ethan discussed modifications with the construction lead. This was what she'd been searching for all along. Not just a successful project, but a life built on choices she could defend, relationships grounded in honesty, work that made the world measurably better. It had started with a declined credit card and a stranger's kindness in a grocery store. It had grown through gardens and trust betrayed and painful truths finally told. And it had become this: a neighborhood taking shape, a family forming from unexpected pieces, a future built on the foundation of choosing integrity over convenience. Claire had learned that the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. That paying forward wasn't just about money or favors, but about showing up for people, about fighting for communities, about building structures, both literal and metaphorical, that held space for everyone. And as Lily ran back to grab both their hands, pulling them toward where Dorothy was unveiling plans for the community center's art studio, Claire knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not success measured in profit margins or corner offices, but something infinitely more valuable: a life that mattered, built one honest choice at a time, surrounded by people she loved and work that served something larger than herself. It was enough, more than enough. It was home.